And Chairman Palmer, it is now 1 o'clock, whenever you would like to begin.
Hold on a second. So good afternoon. I'm Chairman Donald Palmer with the designated federal officer of the United States Election Assistance Commission Technical Guidelines Development Committee. I'm calling this virtual meeting to order. So I have a few opening comments before we get started and take a look at the agenda. I want to thank you once again for joining us to continue our work on the VVSG 2.1. Our directive in HAVA and the TGD Charter is to assist the executive director of the EAC in the development of the voluntary voting system guidelines, and as members may adopt resolutions, motions, or recommendations within the scope of the duties of the TGDC to the Commission for consideration by the EAC. Your ongoing technical insights are foundational to ensuring that the VVSG receives your input on the highest standards of security, accessibility, and reliability of the voting systems. So today's agenda will once again focus on the proposed updates to the draft of VVSG 2.1 as reviewed by EAC staff, NIST, and members of the TGDC. So the second TGDC workshop meeting today follows our meeting on July 2nd, where the body unanimously voted to ask the EAC and NIST to host 2 additional workshops to be able to further communicate with each other and have each other's considerations in full development of the EAC, in the VVSG. The first workshop was last Friday, and we appreciate the progress made on providing feedback and discussion. With the second hearing workshop, we look forward to hearing your remarks related to the 2.1 and ask that you give consideration to others in the virtual room as we identify where the document is strong, where it can be clarified, potentially find consensus, and where improvements to language or concepts may make a real difference to future voting system technology. I would encourage you to feel free to expand on that and provide in writing or in the meeting for the record. Believe me, often the minority opinion ends up being the best option for further reflection, so make sure you provide us your comments. As the DFO and chairman of the EAC, I certainly have an interest in your technical feedback for consideration, and formally your comments and technical advice will ultimately be directed to the executive director as we follow the HAVA process of receiving feedback from all stakeholders and statutory advisory boards under the EAC, incorporating the product of your recommendations. Your feedback today and in the weeks ahead will help us shape a final version of 2.1 that reflects the best technical thinking available and making sure it serves election officials, manufacturers, and ultimately voters in the country. We are here again to allow TGDC members to collaborate in public view in order to work toward consensus feedback on VVS 2.1. EAC and NIST staff are present to answer questions, as well as a representative, Kathy Ng, from the Senior ICT Accessibility Specialist from the U.S. Access Board. Thank you for your attendance, and I look forward to significant participation by the membership today. So, Acting NIST Director Craig Burkhart is not going to be available today. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce AFDO Monica Childers for the roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Craig Burkhart, again, is not joining us today. Brian Caskey.
I am present.
Thank you. Judd Choate.
Hey, Monica, I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you. Diane Golden.
Here.
Isaac Kramer.
Here.
Paul Lux.
Here.
Mary Saunders.
Here.
David Wagner. And Chris Wolashin.
Here.
Thank you so much. That does constitute a quorum for today.
So I'll now call for motions to adopt today's meeting agenda. You should have received that. There will be an open discussion as is traditional to TGDC at the end of the near the end of the meeting for any other comments or questions from the membership. And so at this point, I'd call for a motion. The agenda would need to be moved and seconded by the members.
So moved.
Second.
Let's see here. Do we have any objection? Okay. I will now take a voice vote to adopt the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The agenda is adopted. So let's the first kind of area we go. We have the agenda, and the first area that we're going to to help structure today's discussion, we've divided the topics into categories. We've been able to collect relevant feedback received to date and drafted a few questions and then to assist in order to working toward a resolution for each item. So as a reminder, the current version being drafted is meant to be a minor revision with changes around these handful of topics. However, that doesn't prevent our conversation from being all-encompassing and looking forward toward potential future revisions, minor or major. But it does mean that action items and takeaways from these discussions in VVSG 2.1 or takeaways may not be ideal solution or end result, but rather a step in the right direction. So the first topic that I'd like to get some feedback from you all is thus far we've received comments regarding corrections to grammar, typos, and changing the words at the direction of the TGDC, for example. And these are amenable and these seem like logical. Are there any other errata or wording changes that members would like to bring forward and address that we may not have noted in our review of 2.0 or 2.1? I'm checking everybody to see if there's any. So I think we pretty much have that. Is there a hand up? I can't see everybody. Okay. So the next order, the next category I'd like to discuss is Executive Order 14248 implementation. Let's start with the paper ballot mandate. Kevin Skoglund provided written feedback that moving to a voter verifiable paper-based architecture and removing the path to paperless solutions means several requirements will no longer be applicable. Specifically, requirements 10.2.1-B through F regarding indirect voter associations should be removed and replaced with a single requirement that prohibits indirect voter association in all systems. So generally in talking EAC thus far, we're agreeable to that. Seems like a really good recommendation. The question to the group is, are there any other concerns with fully removing the path to paperless systems in the VVSG?
Well, Don, I will just say that as it relates to removing the references to the paperless systems, I mean, part of me says that this is a little short-sighted because let's be blunt. In another 2.5 years' time, another executive order can come along that says stick it all back in there. I mean, it seems like we could just be on this merry-go-round for a long time if we're going to just start cutting stuff based on this executive order and the changes that it directs. I think to me, it just feels short-sighted to put the TGDC through that every time another executive order comes down that changes the tenor and the standards. The standards should be for voting systems, and they are voluntary, right? That's the first G. So it's up to the states to implement what they want to implement. or to purchase systems that meet these standards. And that's a state by state decision. And if a state wants a paperless system, regardless of what the VVSG says, a state can have a paperless voting system. And I just think it's short-sighted to remove standards that are already in there, based on, what future use might entail.
So I appreciate that. If there's any alternative language or sort of way to handle that, we would appreciate it either in writing or just think about it, or the group can. So I do see Judd Choate's hands up.
Hey, Don, thanks. So, I'm gonna take your issue and I'm gonna move it a little bit and look at it from a different angle. So, I think if we're gonna go down the road of eliminating non-paper systems, by extension, we should tackle the whole idea of wireless communication. So I propose that we crack open 14.2C and 14.2E, which are the sections that deal with the hardware associated with wireless communication in voting systems, and rewrite those to eliminate wireless communication.
So I appreciate that. I actually think that that may be something to have some future discussions on. I actually would appreciate your comments in writing on that, because I know there's some discussion on that. Now, this version of the VVSG right now is very narrow. It's very, it's not a huge change. And I'm going to be agnostic about, I'm not going to determine right now if it's major or minor change that should be in 2.1, but I think that depending on how we approach that issue, it could be something. So I would encourage you, and maybe at the end of the topics, we can break that open. I think I want to get through the three major categories, 3 or 4 major categories that we're looking at, and then maybe we can bring that up at the end. Does that sound like a plan? If we're still able after hours of this?
Well, yeah, I do think that they're related, but I'll take your point that we can bring it up. I guess I'm saying that if we are doing a re-examination of VVSG 2.0, then let's do a re-examination of 2.0. And one of the things that we left in 2017 was the idea of eliminating the hardware in systems that permits wireless communication. So let's go ahead and go there, and let's figure out if that can be eliminated and what it would entail and the effect that it would have on the industry and testing and so forth. So that's where I'd like the conversation to go.
Okay. So let's address that at the end, because I think it's a great topic. It's not sort of on the 2.1 draft yet, but you just bringing it up is something that we're going to take consideration, and we're going to follow up one way or the other. So one more time, Judd, if you have that
Yeah.
section, could you lay it out for the group one more time? And
yeah, it's 14.2C, and then there are little subpoints related to it in 14.2C, but then also 14.2E draws in the usage. So those are the two sections that I think this implicates. There may be others, but those are the two sections that I was most drawn to.
Commissioner Hovland.
Sorry, I defer to Mary Saunders, whose hand is up.
Ms. Saunders.
Thanks. Just briefly, I wanted to speak in support of Paul's comment about the voluntary voting system standards and the paperless ballot aspects of the standards. These are voluntary standards. They're developed obviously through a consensus process. The executive order is it's an implementation issue, and as you know, executive orders only can apply to federal agencies, to folks in the executive branch. So it would apply to EAC. It's an implementation issue rather than a standards related issue. So I agree with Paul strongly that taking out parts of standards that don't comply with a particular implementation direction is not the best way to go in a consensus environment.
On that issue, Paul, I
Yeah.
would also point out that, in 2.0, it really lays out a path toward that. There's a process and a path that has had difficulty really starting and getting engaged. And a lot of the feedback has been, I would say, quite negative from election officials on going in that direction. But we are open again to comments on that, on what that would look like if not total elimination. What would it look like? What are some triggers under 2.1, under 2.0 or 2.1 that would allow that process to start, for example? But I would encourage that, because the current language of 2.0, as you probably have heard in other areas or arenas, has not been an easily accessible, or there's not a clear path to how that process would work. And if we were to look at that, it would have to be much more clear. At least that's my opinion as a commissioner. Commissioner Hovland, your hands are still up. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman Palmer. I was just going to comment about sort of this issue and, thinking back to the January meeting, before the executive order ever existed, we really focused on the EDE in the January meeting to try to jumpstart that. Frankly, I will say back when 2.0 was adopted, I didn't think EDE was ready for prime time, but I think there was an appetite to include it because there was a fear that people wouldn't get another bite at the apple. We've seen 4 years and almost no progress. Our friends at NIST say that we're 10 years out from having a standard. And so we had that January meeting to kind of jumpstart how could we do something around EDE. And I frankly walked away from that startled at the lack of interest or appetite to do anything on that. So I think here, more than I look at this as anything related to the executive order, I look at it as the feeling that we walked away from in the January meeting, and the sort of apathy toward exploring this technology within the VVSG out of that meeting. I don't know if others feel differently, but that was certainly my takeaway from the January meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. Diane Golden.
So I'm probably going to say what needs to be said about the reason we've got the whole no paper mandate is because of the accessibility problems with paper and paper ballots. I mean, that's what the hope was, that EDE could provide security to satisfy the cybersecurity people without a voter verified paper ballot as the ballot of record, blah, blah, blah. And everything that's happening in EDE is just added on to a paper ballot. It's not in lieu of, it's not replacing it. So in terms of accessibility, we've gained nothing. So I mean, I think the whole reason the software independence euphemism is in there is because of the accessibility problems. And, the only place digital ballots are being used is in remote voting, and that isn't subject to the VVSG. So kind of set that aside. I mean, I get the argument about it does close the door completely and it's a standard and you're responding to an EO that should be about implementation. I agree with all of that. But, at the end of the day, the only thing for me that it might help is help bolster our continuing frustration with the fact that we still can't get paper ballots accessible because things keep getting misinterpreted and misapplied and misunderstood and, et cetera. So if if the logic behind the paper ballot, the concern or the reluctance about adopting one was because of accessibility, cows have left the barn and we're done with that one. So.
Thank you, Judge Choate.
Thanks, Don. Is there anybody here from the access community that could speak to these issues?
And we're talking about the end-to-end.
In the end, and its relationship to the paperless option.
So I know we have a senior staff member with the Access Board. I don't know if she's on right now.
This is Kathy Yang from the Access Board. I'm staff from the
Hi,
Access
Kathy.
Board.
I don't know
Hi.
if you have some welcome to the TGDC. We thank you for attending.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You've heard some of the discussions thus far, and I don't want to put you on the spot. First of all, if you have any comments generally, we'd love to hear them. If you need some time to think about some of the comments you heard, we can come back to you, for example. But we're talking about the end-to-end part of the VVSG and so how it's revised in 2.1 and you heard Mr. Choate ask the question, do you see any accessibility issues? I don't know if you would like more time or if you can respond to that.
If you can offer some clarity on what the question is, I have not had an opportunity to read through the edits to VVSG. And I understand that there's a move to paper ballots. But I don't know that I have all of the details that you're asking. If you could just pose the question in a way that I can probably answer better.
I'll probably ask Mr. Choate to ask the question again, but don't feel like you have to answer this exact moment if you need a little time to think about it. Obviously, if I was in your shoes, I'd want a little bit of time as well. But Judge, you want to try again just on the question and ask it, just re-ask it.
Yeah, I can do that. So it's really an unfair question, Kathy, and I apologize. But the whole idea of end-to-end is that a person could determine or confirm that their vote was counted the way that you intended for it to be counted, the way that the voter intended. And so at least my perspective on all of that has always been that is a purely electronic solution, because frankly, I don't see how you can do that with paper. So how do we overcome the problem that removing paper or requiring paper means that end-to-end is no longer feasible? And if we require paper, how does someone with a disability that doesn't allow them to see that paper or have tactile ability to check and confirm that, how do they then understand that their vote was counted properly?
Yeah, I think there's a known issues regarding accessibility with paper, particularly with individuals who have blindness or low vision or any kind of vision disability. There are other considerations as well if you have any mobility or dexterity issues of handling of the paper. I'll need a little bit more time before I can actually say it's not possible, because I don't think I fully comprehend the whole paper balloting, because it is possible for a person with a disability to select their votes, but if the only way to validate that their selections were correctly recorded is through paper, at some point there's tremendous difficulty in that step, And I'll need some time to really think about that. Maybe later in this meeting, I can offer a little bit more insight.
Thank you, Kathy. Commissioner Holland, is your hands up?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to jump in there because that really isn't a fair situation for Kathy. I mean, I'm going to play Diane for a second here. Sorry, Diane. Like the reality is whether or not this is here or not, intellectually, what we can appreciate for accessibility, sure, but pragmatically, there are none of these systems. We're not close to one of these systems. NIST tells us we're 10 years from being able to even have the standard, the cryptographic standard, or the protocol to be able to test this. So, best case scenario, if you leave this alone, we're talking about paper for a decade. So, and again, back in January, literally no one seemed to be interested in moving this along at all. So, again, I think there would be room, in my opinion, to talk about pilots or ways to look to not stagnate technology, but there really seemed to be no appetite to lean into this or invest in it in the way that would be necessary to see this be a reality. And so then it's an intellectual exercise about tomato.
Thank you, Commissioner Holland. Isaac Kramer of South Carolina.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is not getting enough voices from the accessibility community on this. I think a lot of us here are election officials, maybe, and I just know that some of the products that have been introduced from our UOCAVA, the military and overseas voters, would support this use of technology that we use for military voters, and they've kind of used that as we would use this for people with disabilities. This could be the platform from which they could vote. And there have been some test cases and pilots done in other states with this technology, specifically with this community. So I don't know, I'm not an expert in this arena for accessibility and this use, but I know this has been used by other vendors nationally to promote a voting that would be secure in a way that would capture the intent and confirmation of the voter, knowing that it is accurate. So that was just my thing. I mean, the big thing here, I think we've heard the last couple of calls, not enough people speaking up in the accessibility community. And we just need that as we go forward. So it presents a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Mr. Skoglund.
I think I can offer some comments that'll help clarify some things. So there's sort of three kind of practical implementations that one could have for an EDEV system. One is what we commonly know as Election Guard. It's a very popular software program that's out there where you have a paper ballot and EDEV is a layer on top of that. That's not really what we're talking about here. There's also another use case where you use it for remote voting, for UOCAVA, for things like that. That's also not what we're talking about here, because we're really talking about the voting system in the precinct. The third case is that someone could design a system that was just a standalone polling place system that did EDEV. We've never seen someone build such a thing, but it's possible. And because the VVSG 2.0 took a principle-based approach, EDEV in the polling place does meet the principles of VVSG 2.0. And therefore, it was allowed as a potential avenue. Now, we haven't seen people developing these, but in theory, someone could. Personally, I'm not bothered if we add the paper requirement. I don't think that's a significant change, but I think it's important to sort of detail out those three use cases. And we really are talking about a new system that doesn't exist to my knowledge, that would be in the polling place that would be doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Skoglund. Diane Golden.
I'm just gonna hopefully throw something out here that might clarify and provide some backup to Kathy coming on. Kathy's coming on from the Access Board as a ICT accessibility person, which is looking at computer access, telecom access, the whole Section 508 requirements. voting is, I don't even know how to just, I have been working in accessibility, assistive technology, disability work for 40 years. It took me 5 years to get up to speed on voting equipment. It is so completely and totally different from any other computer access, assistive technology. There are so many nuances because of the privacy, the independence requirements, the fact that it's voting, and the nuances of trying to make a paper ballot that has to be private, so it can't be like a banking transaction that isn't, there are just so many details to this. For me, even working with engineers who build voting equipment, we will go round and round in circles, and finally there's an aha moment and they get what I'm saying. This is really, really, really complicated and intricate, and we talked last time about people not realizing what is and isn't fully accessible. When I look at a voting system, it takes me forever to figure out if it's actually fully accessible. Looking at a voting system, I have no idea if it's fully accessible. It can talk, it can have switches. That doesn't mean it's accessible. So it's all I'm saying is it's very difficult. Kathy's going to have to take time to get up to speed, but that's part of the problem too about rotating people through here and trying to dig up that technical expertise. And folks with disabilities, a blind person is going to have a perspective about what's accessible for them. Someone with a physical limitation, there's a whole different perspective coming from lived experience and usability. So just laying all that out, saying this is not simple, it's actually complicated, and that's part of the reason we keep going down this road where we think we have clear standards that explain what making paper accessible really requires, and then it turns out apparently we don't have real understanding of that.
Thank you, Diane. I don't see any more hands on this particular issue on the paper ballot mandate. Any other concerns before we move on?
Well, Don, I would just point out that the members should have received Diane's suggested edits to 5.1E and 9.1.5E. And I don't see how we conclude a discussion of barcodes and paper ballot requirements without talking about her suggested edits.
Yes, Paul, I have that under the section under the request for interpretation because that was during that discussion last time. Can we wait till then? I think that would be the
Sure. I just didn't. I know most of the concern in this issue ties into the paper ballot mandate, which is the other thing. But we can talk about it in either place.
Okay. And if we don't fully do it, we'll come back to this issue. Okay. Mandy Vigil from New Mexico.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I think you might have just touched on my question with your last response to Paul, but ultimately, just given I think I don't have new concerns to raise from the last call, but just kind of echoing Diane and Isaac and even Judd, I think Kathy is, we can all understand it's unfair to ask her to be up to speed right now. But given that we don't have that expertise, are we going to revisit this issue when that is available?
Well, this is the opportunity for the TGDC to provide that feedback. The chair of the Access Board, I don't believe was able to make it today. He wasn't able to speak last time for reasons I can't discuss. But the members of the Access Board we are making Kathy available, and obviously during our public comment phase and in the standards and board of advisors, disability groups will have the full opportunity to comment in writing to these same issues. So I know we have a vast amount of experience on these issues, accessibility issues, and for serving voters with disabilities. And we'll do the best we can, and then we'll have additional comments from the rest of the country, both public and during our FACA board process, as I like to call it, the HAVA the HAVA process. I hope that addresses your issues. Judd, you
I
have
think
another
it's an
question?
I think it's an answer. I guess I'll just reiterate my concern with the TGDC being asked to make, a decision on language without that input during this process is still a concern for me.
Yeah, I understand. On this issue, we really want you to, at least on this particular issue, I'd like any feedback you have, particularly as election officials, because on the end-to-end, removing the end-to-end portion of this and going to paper ballots, this was a significant move, but it also is something that we heard a lot of caution from the election community. We literally had a hearing on this with multiple panels of basically election officials, including from NASED, and there was a lot of caution expressed because of the impact on voter confidence on this, and the lack of progress, and just asking us to go slow. And so, I think as an election official, you have conversations with voters with disabilities and military voters that may be remote, and so as we heard from Isaac, what is the impact on those voters if we remove this? What is the position of the election directors about moving to more of a paper ballot system versus research on end-to-end? Mr. Cho.
Thanks, Don. So just sort of drilling down to some of the substance of your first response to Mandy. Am I hearing that you don't anticipate future meetings of this group to discuss the changes? Because I think what Mandy's saying is, let's get Kathy up to speed, or maybe there's others that are on the access board, or other people, maybe Elver can join next time, and that will give us an opportunity for a more fruitful discussion. But you didn't imply that there would be a future meeting, that those future conversations could occur. Or can we nail you down on the idea that we'll have a future meeting where we can talk about those things?
Judge, you can try to nail me down at the end of the session. I think that we've got things on the agenda we got to get through, and we can talk about future action at that point. Thank you, Judd.
Okay, fair enough.
Isaac Kramer from South Carolina.
Yeah. So hearing what Kevin said, that that it's possible, even though there might not be anything on the radar right now, that it's possible for paperless end-to-end verifiable system. I'm just speaking to South Carolina specifically. I know some states do curbside voting, some don't. We do. I just think there's gotta by closing this, like just eliminating this, I don't think is a good idea for future. Technology has advanced so much in the last couple of years to begin with. I know that NIST is saying 10 years away. That's based on knowledge of today. But with everything that's expanded and grown in technology, I'd feel uncomfortable just eliminating this potential to serve members of the disability community, especially our voters. I hear it every election. The accessibility is on some people's radars. We had an accessibility fair here in Charleston County a couple weeks ago, and heard some horror stories about people's voting experiences. And that's not what we want. We want to have a system that can serve all voters. And I really would not want to see this go away. I know in January there may be some through roundtables and conversations with other election directors, you might get a different tone or opinion. But really, this would be something in the disability community that you would want to keep open still, in my opinion.
So, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Kramer, that's a very legitimate position. I would just give you a few points. So maybe, on this issue is that we set standards, DAC, and so serving voters, be it voters with disabilities or remote military UACAVA voters, This is a policy. This is a policy that states implement on how they're going to send or return ballots to these type of voters. Now, the VVSG, there's been a lot of discussion about this over the years about what would be within scope of the VVSG and outside the scope. Some of these systems are just simply outside the scope of the VVSG. As was mentioned by another board member. Some might be within. Like, for example, it was raised about election guard. It's dealing with paper ballots in a polling place. So there are potentially some areas that involve paper ballots, but generally, most of these systems are going to be outside the VVSG, and so there may be research done or that evaluation of those systems, but the VVSG, and so this is a long-going debate, and I would encourage you to put that in writing, and we hear you. And look, this will be an issue that the other FACA boards are going to deal with. But if there's a consensus on there, if there isn't, on the particularities of UOCAVA or the voters with disabilities, just state those for the record, get that into writing. But just understand that there is a strong position that a lot of these systems would be outside the scope of the VVSG. Any other questions on this or comments? Okay. So the next issue that we have is QR codes and barcodes. So the feedback that we got from Isaac Kramer from South Carolina notes that some voters do not trust barcodes and proposes that we consider eliminating barcodes entirely. Feedback from Kevin Skoglund notes that barcodes encoding votes creates an attack vector and the potential for conflicting vote records on ballots. Paul Lux and Mandy Vigil note concerned about the cost and disruption if the barcodes encoding votes are phased out too quickly, since some states depend on barcode systems. David Wagner notes that barcodes can remain and have a purpose which can be consistent with the EO, and that the above feedback has previously been discussed during the drafting of VVSG 2.0. The result of that discussion was the compromise language in VVSG 2.0, where bar and QR codes are required to be transparent and audible. So that was some of the feedback we received, both in writing and through these meetings. So overall, the intent is to ensure, and this is sort of a question for the group, the intent is to ensure that barcodes with voter selections are being generated on marking devices that meet applicable VVSG requirements. Is there another way that we can address this intent in the wording of VVSG 2.1? Any comments?
Hey, Don, can you point us at the section or sections that you're implicating right now?
Sure. I'm going to jump in because that's one that I sent out edits to. It's 9.1.5-E.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
So obviously I had my hand up because, yeah, I have comments. I sent them out.
Thank you, Diane. Did you have a comment on, Judge, did you have a comment or was that a question?
No, it was just directing me to the point that Diane was trying to make.
Okay, great. Diane, did you have a comment or were you just helping us all out here?
Well, I mean, I sent it out, so I'm assuming people looked at it. It doesn't make a lot of sense discussed before the RFI discussion because it kind of leads back to the discussion about the RFI and the whole, there's got to be one system identified as fully accessible kind of thing. And so anyway, this is just tweaked to clean up, first get rid of the word only, because only generated on, that's going to be interpreted as only people with disabilities can use this thing and have a barcode. That's just bad. It's an unnecessary word and it's going to lead to misinterpretations. So it's just edited to say barcodes are generated on an electronic voting system identified as accessible, relating to the change to, you gotta identify the one that's fully accessible apart from everything else. So that's what the barcode's generated on. So that's the edit.
Thank you. Any other comments on that first question? And I have another question, but I'll see if there's any more comments on this.
Yeah, I appreciated Diane's breaking this down, and I think that really captures um, a lot of the discussion that we've had about the issue. And I like the edit that Diane proposed there for 9.1.5e.
Thank you. So regardless of the draft version, does this committee believe, I mean, it's I really appreciated Mr. Kramer bringing up the issue. Does a committee believe that we should transition away from the use of barcodes encoding voter selections and ultimately eliminate their use in voting systems? Kevin Skolin.
I do. And I said this in the last meeting. The primary reason why is because we took a principle-based approach, and one of our principles is in transparency. And one of the points under transparency is that a voter should be able to understand everything that's happening in front of them. There shouldn't be any sort of feeling of like the system is somehow doing something behind their back. And I think that's the ultimate problem that barcodes have. So whether we do it in 2.1, whether we do it in 2.5 or 3.0, I think barcodes do need to be removed.
So Brian Caskey had his hand up next. I'll just say one other question in my mind before I forget it was, there may be some concern in the states that we're even discussing this, but the issue is, this is forward looking. We heard some comments at the last meeting that the industry and many states are moving away from this entirely, and that frankly the barcodes don't provide much. They're not really being used for voters with disabilities significantly. So I just put that out there because that was some of my memory, and if that was a correct thing I heard, or if it needs more context. With that, I know Brian Caskey was next. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Chairman. So I have two comments. One, part of this, I think the marketplace is going to make the decision. Most states are moving away, and I agree with Mr. Scoglin. Like personally, I think that we should get away from them because that's what our voters are telling us almost without exception. But second, I'm also aware that some states need more of a landing to get there than what is currently allowed. And so if there's a way that we can provide enough time for states to get that, and again, let the marketplace decide. But personally, I'm absolutely against using barcodes, especially in the current environment.
Okay. So I think Paul Lux was next from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. And I would agree to a large extent with what Brian said. I was perhaps a little bit relieved to hear Christopher talk about the industry not having a problem with moving away from the barcodes because of advances in optical character recognition, et cetera, so that they'll be able to move forward without it. But to Brian's point, simply, a softer landing spot for those who are using them fully right now and who aren't going to be able to jump in the immediate to a 2.1 system, more particularly to the point that right now we have just one 2.0 system, and now we're going to have a 2.1 standard. And when are we going to start seeing voting equipment coming out from that? So that it's clear, because we at the operational level hear it from voters all the time. Why aren't you using Why aren't you using systems to the 2.0 standard? Well, I'm not using equipment that isn't certified. I'm using equipment that was certified to a different standard, because quite frankly, it doesn't exist anywhere else at the moment, or at least, certainly not last year. There was no 2.0 system for anybody to convert to. So it does have to be sort of nuanced in that regard, as far as the elimination, maybe more of a step down approach than a strike it all and move forward. I don't know how that would, or whether we just all have to agree that creating a 2.1 system of standards does not invalidate the previous standards for people that are still using that other technology.
Right. Thank you, Paul. And that is a message we are sending on 1.0, is that there's a full trust of the EAC behind it with the testing and certification. And I think the states would agree with their testing programs as well. Diane, you're next, Diane.
Just quick follow-up, and agree with what everybody said. It's just a couple of points. I just chuckle when everybody keeps talking about the lack of trust in a barcode versus the trust of print on paper. Well, the only people that trust print on paper can see it. It's just think about it. Folks with disabilities tend to trust digital things because that's how they operate their whole lives. That's what is accessible. So if it's not accessible to you, you don't trust it. So, this whole idea of paper's trustworthy because I can see it, hold it, well, that only works if you're able-bodied and have no sensory deficits, etc. So only thing that if we're moving away from barcodes, then people have to understand there's got to be something to replace that in terms of converting that print content back into a digital form so that a person with a disability can actually trust it, verify it, and trust it. So, people with disabilities trust QR codes and other digital things because that's how they live their lives.
Thank you, Diane. Wesley Wilcox, Florida.
I'll just make a response back to Diane's comment. If a system is capable of recording a vote via OCR, it should then be also capable of reading back audio-wise that same. I think that would be part of the validation verification process. I mean, because that's what the barcode systems do now. You stick them back in, they read the barcode back to the voter that's audio. I would think the OCR systems would do the exact same thing. So
yes, and that wasn't around. The original, the old optical scans could provide a read back using those codings, except for write-ins. So the mechanism has been around. People just didn't realize the systems had to do that for an awful long time. So yes, we certainly have the technology to do it now.
Commissioner Hovland.
Thank you. I was just gonna, for a friendly reminder for those people watching at home, again, I thought it was useful to just remind folks about the nature of conformance testing, and the testing of our systems are to a time, and so certainly there's not a retrospective or a retrospective enforcement or anything like that. So if somebody has, when we talk about runway, everything that we talk about here is forward looking toward future systems that would be certified to a new standard and then purchased under that, but none of it is going to be penalizing backward to existing systems. And we talked about it a little bit last time, but I would also just reiterate, I think the conversation is useful and the feedback's useful, but I think beyond, I think when we talk about barcodes for other purposes beyond tabulation, like ballot style or security measures, etc., to me, having any of that conversation is probably really a 3.0 scope, because I think there you're getting into some real functionality that may be sort of beyond what a minor revision would would take. But certainly, I would defer to technical staff on that, but that was my general sense.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. Mandy Vigil from New Mexico.
Thank you, Commissioner. And actually, Commissioner Hovland kind of touched on the point. I have a question. So my understanding is we're considering kind of minor revisions, right? So when I look at page 15, it kind of it makes a statement that the EO prohibits barcodes containing voter selections except to support accessible voting for voters with disabilities. And it says this is already the case in VVSG 2.0. So that feels different than my understanding of what we're discussing here. Is this applying to future iterations, giving this kind of window of time for election officials that are dependent on this beyond that scope, the ability to really kind of come on board, which I think is what I was hearing from standard boards members. So that kind of hits on a couple of the points I was going to make is, when I'm speaking on behalf of New Mexico, we prohibit QR codes. So, we're in good shape there. But speaking on behalf of my peers across the country, I think there are concerns with them having some space to really implement this appropriately. And I guess I'm worried about, or at least I'm confused on, is this already in 2.0 and expected, or is this new? And if new, is it a minor adjustment?
Well, we've interpreted, Mandy, and staff can jump in. I see John put his screen on. John, do you want to handle that? Or do you want me to? You can go ahead.
Feel free to finish your thought, Chairman.
No. Yours is probably much better than my thought. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think we're talking about sort of two different things. One is the language in the draft right now, and then the conversation kind of shifted to, well, what if there was this removal of barcodes for iterations going forward? And so I think to address your question, Mandy, we don't feel that the change for a 2.1 version for what's stated in the language about barcodes is any different from 2.0. And so the runway necessary for jurisdiction to get this in and to work with them sort of lives with 2.0 as it does with 2.1 as well. Because functionally they're not any different, if that makes sense.
So 2.0, from your perspective, already clearly states that barcodes are only to be used for accessible voting?
Correct. We feel that that's covered the exact same way in 2.0. And so we're trying to just make the language more clear here, that in 2.0, the expectation is that barcodes that store voter selections are going to be generated from an accessible voting device. So that's the gist of why we say it's still in 2.0.
John, would you mind sending me that section?
Sure.
Thank you.
Diane Golden.
I might be able to clarify a little bit, at least in my mind, Mandy, and this goes back to the whole RFI and that interpretation of 5.1D. I think from the testing folks' perspective, all ballot marking devices need to be accessible. So if it's an electronic interface, if it's not hand marked paper, if it's a ballot marking device, then the accessibility standards apply. So the barcode would be generated on one, except of course that the accessibility standards don't apply to the casting part if that's happening over the separate precinct counter. So part of this is tied up in this whole confusion about what that standard said and what I thought it meant and how it's been interpreted. And if that's amended to say, there's a piece of one that does everything and that's identical. Sorry about that. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's part of the explanation.
Okay. Common data format specifications. Any other comments on the barcode issues that have been raised?
Commissioner, is it possible to get some input from kind of our folks in the technology world to understand from the vendor perspective, how they foresee this coming down?
So I could put Chris Woloshyn on the spot. I think one of the things I've heard before I turn it over to him is that they're moving away from this. Well, the barcode, they've already started to move away, and this is a forward-looking VBSG, but it's the future, not the past. We're not banning systems in the field that use the barcode, particularly the barcodes with voters with disabilities. And so, but that's why I think this issue came up, because it's sort of forward-looking. It's not going back and changing one of those systems that are in the field. It's just moving the standard forward. But there could be a agree to disagree, or there could be a disagreement on whether or not it's major or minor. So I'll turn it over to Chris for some additional input and let him speak for the manufacturers.
Thank you, Commissioner Palmer. It is true. One manufacturer has already created a system that does not use barcodes for voter selections. Other manufacturers are actively developing new software that does not use barcodes or QR codes for the encoding of voter selections. And it's my impression that these manufacturers that are working on this now will be submitting for 2.0 certification with the new software in the very near future. So I think that's on a short horizon for not only manufacturers, but for the election officials that will want these systems that do not use barcodes or QR codes.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments on this before we move on? Any questions?
Hey, Don, I'm sorry to come back to this because I already put her on the spot once, but does Kathy have any notes that we should consider from the U.S. Access Board?
What was the previous question that you asked Kathy about? What was the previous question? My memory's not serving.
Oh, that was a question to me.
Yeah.
They are sort of related. I mean, they're kind of the same type of question. In this particular case, I think we're asking, does the barcode functionality in ballots have some important accessibility implications that the TGDC needs to understand?
This is Kathy. I think that people with disabilities are generally familiar with QR codes, and if they have the technology to scan the information, assuming the information is accessible for them, they will be able to understand the information that's provided. I don't think that it's a huge hurdle for people with disabilities. Are you assuming that they will have their own device to scan the QR code?
Well, I think what I'm asking in the question is, would the elimination of barcodes or a QR code affect the likelihood of a voter with a disability to understand that they've cast the ballot in the way that they intended? Right now, I think what we're proposing here is a move away from QR codes, which, as you implied in the first part of your response, is something that technology can easily note to a voter, here is what your ballot, here's how your ballot will be counted. If we move to no more barcodes, and we're talking about individually voted races, on a ballot or some other format, but let's assume that. Does that make it harder for a person with a disability, most notably, let's say a person with a sight disability, to understand that they voted the ballot in the way they intended?
So I want to make sure I'm understanding the process. So a voter has made their selections, and upon submitting I assume that's called casting your ballot. Am I using the right terminology here? So they've made their selections, they submit their selections, and they want to make sure that the selections they made are being recorded correctly. And they want an opportunity to review that. And currently that is being provided through a QR code. Is that the process?
Yeah, that's the way I'm framing the question. There are many others, as the folks on this screen can describe. There are other reasons why a QR code might be useful or beneficial. But yeah, that's the underlying question.
So the QR code, I'm assuming, will take them to the information where their selections have been recorded. They can review it. And the QR code is accessible to people with disabilities, assuming they have the scan technology, which is a phone, or if they don't have a phone, I'm not sure. The QR code is of no use to someone who doesn't have a phone. How else would they get that information if they don't have a scanning device? That's the one dependency. If the voter were taken directly to the page that lists out all of their selections, and that page were accessible, and they had the screen reader for a blind person, for example, they could get that same information if they were taken directly to the information rather than having to rely on a QR code.
Yeah, okay, so that's good. Let me nuance the question a little bit. So in Colorado, we banned QR codes and barcodes that capture votes cast a couple of years ago. So now we have full face ballot. So if it's a Senate race and you are voting for one of the 3 or 7 candidates, the vote is cast in an oval. And then the next one is your U.S. House race, and it's cast in an oval. And then the next one is your, governor's race, and it's cast in an oval. And so it's, instead of having one page where there's a QR code and perhaps a list of who you voted for, now it's a full face ballot. It's just like the ballot that a person would receive in the mail from a Colorado county. Does that present insurmountable or difficult accessibility issues for a voter who needs accessibility aids to understand that the ballot was cast in a way that they're comfortable with, and that they can go back and figure out for themselves that each one of the races has been cast in a way that would tabulate to their wishes. So that's the question that I'm trying to get to.
Judd, can I clarify, because I'm not even clear on the so what is your system using to scan back in? I've got a full page, I've got 5 people running, I'm selecting optical scan dot what. So that's the vote selection on the paper printed. So something's scanning that back in. Is it pure OCR, or is it OpScan plus OCR? And then what do if I'm getting an audio back or a large visual display, what do I hear or see? Do I hear the whole thing read to me and it says so-and-so is selected?
Yes. It goes back through the races and says, for this race, you selected For this race you selected, for this race you selected. And so it doesn't read out every candidate. It only reads out what you have selected for a given race.
Okay, yeah, I was just clarifying because again,
Mhm.
typically if it's using optical scan, that's what, and it does have an OCR overlay, so it can read back the actual text typed in for a write-in, correct? It doesn't just say you voted for write-in.
Yeah, that's right. For ours, it would say, honestly, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I know it says you voted for a write-in. I'm not sure if it tells you what's in the write-in.
And there's the problem. That's why,
Yeah.
quite frankly, QR codes became used for accessibility, is because people didn't want to put
Right.
the OCR on top to do the write-in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's how they weren't developed for that purpose. It was for tabulation, but it was like, oh, this is a better way to do the convert it back. So, and Kathy, in answer to your question, the voter, this is all built into the voting system. That's why these things are so complicated. The voter's not bringing their own AT at
Yeah,
all. This
thank
is
you,
all
Judd.
built
Thank you,
in.
Diane. Brooke, Brooke, you have your hands up. EAC staff, testing and cert chief. Brooke
Well, I
Waters.
know Commissioner Hovland had his hand raised before me. Would you like me to defer to you first?
Well, I just wanted to get the technical, and I'm sure I'll let him weigh in.
Okay. So I just wanted to provide a little extra background on this. So barcodes as they're used historically are not expected for voters to interact with them. It was a method for when you have like a multi-page ballot and you're doing it through a ballot marking device, just as Jed described, that you have a barcode or QR code that's captured your selections for the machine to read it back more quickly. When drafting 2.0, and I wish that David Wagner was here only because he said this very well at the last meeting, was that a lot of the discussion was around this is your vote is now obscured. Kevin has also pointed this out and that you now have 2 votes. Oh, I guess I've been notified that David's here, so he might be able to say it more elegantly than I can. But the idea here was that maybe a technology would be made so voters could interact with this. But as a piece of that, barcodes in the past have always been encoded or used a different proprietary formatting. And so that added to the privacy of what the voter selections were in that barcode. But that doesn't allow for visibility or transparency. So now we have requirements around if you have a barcode, not only does it have to be alongside a human readable, but it must be in an open format, open source. So somebody could create a technology to read this if they'd like. But even beyond the voter having their own technology brought to this, which hasn't been created, there's other requirements around ensuring that the voter must provide, they must be provided the opportunity to verify that the voting system has correctly interpreted their ballot selections. And there's talk of review screens when you feed your ballot back in. And this is the requirement I just read was 913A. I can put that in chat. But I just want to provide a little extra context here to make sure that it was clear that it wasn't intended that the voter has to have a phone in order to know what they voted. But to have a third-party verification as a possibility was envisioned.
Thank you, Brooke. Commissioner Hovland.
And I was just gonna sort of echo Brooke's comments, or really from the last time, I appreciated the use case that she raised. Obviously, here we're primarily talking about verification accessibility, but the use case example of the multi-page ballot and the hands-free handling of that, obviously, I'm not an engineer, but I can imagine how that gets more complicated or limits the different ways that somebody could approach that challenge of creating a hands-free paper with multi-page ballots. And so I thought that was another good use case. This does have a potential accessibility intersection.
So thank you for that, a question and answer, and then I appreciate Brooke weighing in. So we're making great progress, but I'm going to be kind. And how about a 10-minute break? Unless there's serious opposition who wants to push forward, I propose a 10-minute break. Is there any opposition to that? All right. See you in 10 minutes, and that would be how about 2:25? We'll get started at 2:25. Welcome back, everybody. The next issue on the agenda is to talk about common data format, the CDF specifications that we've had discussions on. So we received feedback from Chris Woloshyn regarding the new requirement for micro CDF in the wording of 4.1-H. This feedback identifies two terms for ballot definition, logical and physical. While we work toward making physical ballot definition use mandatory in future versions, the EAC is amenable to only using the logical ballot definition in VVSG 2.1. Logical ballot definition would keep the requirement as optional. However, if a manufacturer wanted to implement the physical ballot definition, then requirement 4.1-H would become required. So the question for the members is, what members consider, would members consider this a stepping stone approach to fit the intent and direction for improving the VSG? Would that be seen as moving in the right direction? And that really is the question and comment on that sort of written comment by Chris Woloshyn. Chris, would that address your issue? Do you think that's an appropriate way to handle it?
Yes, sir. You stated the issue eloquently. That micro CDF, I think, would be important for logical ballot definitions. Common data formats are widely used. They allow different pieces of technology to exchange information. You could also see in the election space a election management system producing streams of data information that county or state reporting systems can ingest without data manipulation or data conversion. They have very valid uses. And our members think that our members state they don't have an issue using common the micro CDF with logical ballot definitions, but to try to make the jump to physical ballot definitions is a leap too far for a 2.1 minor revision. This should be considered a stair-step approach, and perhaps, as you suggest, maybe a 3.0 VBSG requirement. Let me pause there for questions or comments.
Thank you. Judge Schode from Colorado.
Thanks, Don. So I agree with Chris. This seems like a big thing. I'm not in the vendor world. I don't have to make these kind of mechanical decisions, but my goodness, this would be a significant alteration to the current sort of framework on the way these systems communicate.
Okay, thank you. Thought I saw another hand, but let me check the other page. Well, thank you for the comments,
Hey, Don,
Chris. Yes.
I would, sorry to interrupt, but I would be interested to hear what John Panic and Brooke have to say about this from the Pro VNV and SLI perspective, and what does the EAC technical side think?
Chris or Brooke, when do you want to handle that, or
John?
We have, yeah, I was gonna say, at least for the labs, we haven't discussed this explicitly with either Pro VNV or SLI compliance. I'm not sure if they're available or if John would like to speak to this, but there are some use cases for this and some understanding of stepping in that direction, because using the physical ballot definition would be a bigger change, and trying to keep in line with the minor revision. We are just I think it gives us in the right direction, but it is just to use the logical, more simplistic approach.
John, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to, thank you, address the point about minor versus major with respect to the physical ballot definition. Excuse me, the way we've defined minor versus major revisions in the life cycle policy is determined by backward compatibility. And so I think, having the stepping approach is fine, in my opinion, if we make the physical an optional part of this for now, with the idea that we want to move toward that in the future. But I think that while we recognize it as a significant change to the architecture of systems, that the physical ballot definition could still live in like a 2.x, 2.3 version, and 2.4, something along those lines in the future. So that's my comment about major versus minor. And but yeah, like Chairman said, we're amenable to making the physical ballot definition piece optional. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Chairman unless there's other questions about our perspective on making those edits.
Thank you. Thank you, John. All right. So thank you for the comments and the written comments and the discussion today on the issue of the common data format specs in 2.1. The next issue, the discussion on the request for interpretation, the RFIs. So we have received a number of comments, one for RFI 2023-03. The requirement was 2.1-A, which updates the language to include structured error handling implementations. So David Wagner had recommended an update to the wording to include a sub-requirement that more directly addresses the type check signaling of errors as performed by Rust. And our team appreciated that comment and thinks it's probably correct. So we agree with those changes, potential changes. Any other comments on that RFI? Okay. We also received feedback on RFI 2025-02, requirement 5.1D for the use of accessibility. So Diane Golden has recommended the following wording to be included into the requirement. Quote, at least one voter-facing device or set of devices within a voting system shall A, be publicly identified as accessible, and B, include all accessibility features that enable voters with disabilities to mark, verify, and cast a paper ballot privately, independently, without assistance from others. So the EAC at first review would like to consider the added wording, noting that the only change would be to publicly identify the equipment. The concept of at least one and voter independence in addition to subsection B is met by requirement 6.2A, stating that the voting system must allow for voter independence. So we haven't received additional comments on this, but I wanted to open it up for discussion and get that feedback from you all. I see Kevin Skoglund has raised his hand.
I did not understand what the term publicly identified would mean in terms of compliance testing, because the vendor is not publicly identifying anything. I could guess that maybe you're thinking that it needs some kind of a sticker or an emblem or something on the component. But I think that if that's true, I think that's a little bit problematic, because a component could be used both in a accessible configuration and a non-accessible configuration. I mean, a A simple example, you might imagine a ballot marking device and a tabulator that can function separately, but they could also maybe be snapped together in some way to be an all-in-one device as well. But the components themselves are neither, they're not inherently accessible. So I wasn't sure what publicly identified means. So maybe Diane, if you could clarify how a vendor would publicly identify it.
So part of it is in public marketing materials clearly identifies. And the examples I'm trying to give to folks, and I'm going to talk about examples related to voting and others. So there's requirements for accessible parking spaces. Accessible parking spaces are labeled accessible. You can drive up and see a parking space that's wider and think it's accessible, but it's not. Same way with accessible entrances to buildings, accessible stalls in a bathroom. The public needs to know what's accessible. If you're a person with a disability, you're looking for accessible entrances, accessible everything. So that's part of it. But the other part is, and I hope folks at heart don't get upset, but the system that was just certified, which has brought all this to light yet again, has a ballot marking device that has a whole lot of access features to it. That is not the fully accessible one. The fully accessible one is a separate system that the marketing materials may or may not be shared. And unless they are, an election official is in a real bind. They each need to become accessibility experts to drill down and say, okay, this one's got all this. Does it have everything? Does it meet all of the 2.0 access standards? Well, no, there's this one it doesn't meet, that automatic paper handling thing. That's just a horrible position to put election officials in, and it just undermines the whole point of having 2.0 accessibility certification. And that's part of the problem with accessibility being dumped into an overall. Usually accessibility stands on its own. It's a legal floor. So yeah, this building meets ADAG or it doesn't. And somehow that's got to be publicly known about voting systems. And as you say, yes, you could have two components that dock. That's accessible. You pull them apart, it no longer meets. And all I'm saying is somehow that has to be publicly known information, or else election officials aren't going to know, people with disabilities aren't going to know, advocates aren't going to know. And we've just undermined this whole process of having these great access standards, but people don't know which device or device combo actually meets.
So I didn't quite get the answer I was hoping for, because I don't really understand how practically one would mark it publicly identified. Like if it's in the documentation, I completely understand that. Like it could be in the documentation to say this is what a publicly, what the system ought to look like. But I don't really understand how a vendor would comply with this and say, yes, I have publicly identified it. What process are you envisioning there?
I'm open to suggestions. I mean, I'm fine with something on the equipment. I'm fine with the marketing materials about the equipment having to disclose. There just has to be some way that this is not only me and a handful of people realize that this wasn't fully accessible. This was, but they both were certified to 2.0. This doesn't apply to anything else. The system complies with security requirements. Well, it's the whole thing. It's everything. And the accessibility standards were intended to do that. But with this RFI, interpreting that that's not the case, it's not every voter-facing device has to be fully accessible. Then if you're going to say that in the RFI, then you've got to identify what is and isn't. And how it's done, somebody needs to figure it out. But either the RFI needs to be rescinded and we go back to everything meets all accessibility requirements, no exception, then it's not a problem. Or if you're going to do it this other way, then there's got to be clear identification of what meets the entire set of accessibility standards.
Yeah, before I let Commissioner Hovland, I'll just have one comment is obviously, the state wants to be aware of what the entire voting system is and that it's accessible. Now, there may be different components that are used within their state. State also has an interest in knowing for their localities that they are meeting at least one system requirement of accessibility. So the question is, what can the VVSG require of manufacturers or some other policy the EAC can do? Like we do have a 2.0 sticker, but again, I think we get into some of those times that's not really visible except to an election worker, or you have to actually look for it. It may not be prominent. So I think this is more of a state and local issue about identifying, and that has raised issues too, Diane. And I'll just say, having a big sign that says this is the accessible machine, or even if it's a prominent sticker, that has issues with I've had voters complain about that, or election officials as well. You're making me out to be, this outsider or something. It's kind of, you don't need to highlight the fact that I might have a disability. So I'm sure you've heard that too. So there's, these are issues that how much do you want to identify that? Now, I think for election officials, we do, they're going to receive manuals and, what are the capabilities and accessible features? And I just think this is more of a state issue, but I'm going to let Commissioner Hovland weigh in on this.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Palmer. I was just going to sort of ask or think about the balance of, I certainly take the point, but I'm trying to think about, is the certification standard the right place to address that? Is this really a contractual issue, or is this a DOJ enforcement issue? Nothing in certification changes requirements under the ADA. Certainly, if I were buying a voting system, and I knew that I needed to comply with HAVA and the ADA, contractually, I would insist on language in there that protected me with a requirement that I was getting a fully accessible system. And I recognize, Diane, that you specialize in this and I don't, and that it is hard to know through the whole process whether or not that would be accessible. But I just am trying to think through if the standard is, or the certification standard is the right place to address that concern.
And I'm going to
I don't know if
respond. No,
Yeah.
I don't think it is. The problem is the RFI created this problem. The certification standard itself expected everything to be fully accessible, so it wasn't an issue. But the RFI undid that. So either the RFI needs to be rescinded and we just need to revisit this as a new RFI to figure out how to do this outside of certification, or you're going to have to add something to certification to sort of mitigate the impact of the RFI, undoing everything is fully accessible.
Thank you, Diane. Brian Cassidy from Kansas.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hey, Diane, this is a crummy question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you seen any practical effects since the RFI was issued? Like, have you seen any change in behavior in the vendors? Because I agree with you. Like, we're tying ourselves in knots over the RFI, and it appears that the RFI has changed what 2.0 was intended. So, since the RFI was issued, have vendors changed their behavior that you know of, or is this more of a semantic argument at this point, knowing it could be something in the future?
So the broker, John, can maybe answer, but I think the RFI allowed the one certified system to be certified, allowing the precinct counter without automatic paper handling to be certified, absent the automatic paper handling. So I don't think it's changed behavior, proactively, but that the HART system that got certified has a standalone precinct counter, which I'm not arguing against being able to certify those at all, fine. It's got a ballot marking device. There's hand marked paper options, obviously. It's got a ballot marking device. It has, I'm guessing, I haven't seen it, evaluated it, but I'm guessing provide probably a full range of access features for ballot marking. I hope verification, maybe, maybe not, who knows, but it does not provide accessible casting. I assumed that that device would have some sort of ability to dock to the precinct counter or to a non-tabulating ballot box to provide the fully accessible version. Instead, it's a whole different unit, different name, different marketing materials. I'm like, okay, how is somebody going to know that this thing that has all these bells and whistles that looks accessible is not the fully accessible one? That one's over here called something different. I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is a problem. So yeah, this is a problem today, now.
No, I hear you, and to me the problem's with the RFI, not the original standard. So I guess I'm trying to understand what our mechanism is to review that, because I completely see where you're coming from.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Caskey. David Wagner.
I do see Kathy, you had raised your hand before me. If you'd like a chance to speak first, I want to defer to you.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to offer a bit of how the federal government handles documentation of accessibility. Section 508 also requires that everything's fully accessible, and in the commercial marketplace, we rarely find something that meets all of the Section 508 requirements. And so we in procurement acquisition practices, agencies will require that an accessibility conformance report is completed, and that identifies all of the accessibility requirements. For us, it's Section 508. Internationally, they have different accessibility laws. So within this accessibility conformance report, the industry or manufacturer has an opportunity to indicate how well they conform to each of the requirements. And this is part of the documentation that is requested by agencies when they are doing their market research, when they are doing product selection, and then they can consider the accessibility of each of the products that meet their needs. So that they are aware of the level of accessibility of each component or system that they're buying.
Thank you, Kathy. Mr. Wagner.
Thanks. I wanted to comment on Diane's proposed language here. Overall, I like what this is doing, and I appreciate this work to find a solution to this problem. So it seems like a good direction to me. I had I wanted to comment on some of the discussion about the history and the RFI, share a different perspective on that, which may not change what we do on this language too much, and then make a minor raise a minor concern about the specific language and implementation of this approach. So there's some discussion about this is a problem that was created by the RFI, and I don't see it that way. When we had discussions about the VVSG 2.0, I had always understood that to mean that the VVSG 2.0 would allow a voting system that has hand-marked paper ballots with a precinct scanner and then an accessible ballot marking device. So in that's a kind of a voting system that has multiple devices in it. It might have a precinct scanner device, it might have a ballot marker device, it might have a central count scanner. And I had always understood the standard to mean that not every one of those needs to satisfy all access requirements, but that the system as a whole must be accessible, meaning that voters with accessibility needs must have some way to vote, which might mean the hand-marked ballot, or it might mean the ballot marking device. So I I guess I just disagree with some of the sentiments that I'm hearing here that everything was fine and then the RFI introduced a problem. I think this approach codified in the RFI was how I'd always understood things to be intended in the VVSG 2.0. Maybe others had a different understanding, or maybe I'm missing something. Um, I don't think that changes anything. We are where we are, and we have a proposal from Diane on the table. And it seems like a very reasonable proposal to me to ask that there be transparency, a statement of how the system complies. If a voter has accessibility needs, which device do they use? It seems very reasonable to ask a manufacturer to just state the intent, and to provide it in a way that election officials who need that information can find it. So I like what this is attempting to do. I wanted to raise one, like maybe minor point. I don't know if it might be purely theoretical. This language seems to have baked in the assumption that there is one device that meets all accessibility needs. And I think that's true in all the systems that we have today or that we're envisioning for the near future. I'm just wondering if there might be some future system that some manufacturer might come up with that has two devices, and some voters with accessibility needs would use the first and some would use the second. I don't know. Those with vision impairment would use the first, and with paper impairment would use the second. I don't have a concrete example of why that might come up. So that's why I say this might be purely theoretical and maybe it's not worth worrying about. But I just wondered if we might want to make some like friendly revisions to allow for those unanticipated possibilities that manufacturers might come up with. Maybe it's not a big deal. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, David Wagner. Brooke Waters, you have your hand up.
I saw Diane come off mute if
Oh, I'm
you'd like to
sorry.
respond to David.
Diane, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say, actually, that's kind of what Hart has done. Because and again, I haven't seen their Flex, not the Adapt, two different ballot marking devices. But it looks like one has, I'm gonna use the word more commonly used accessibility features versus the one that is the all-in-one that has the automatic paper handling. One would assume is going to be used by fewer people potentially. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, vendors are already, I think, thinking about doing that. And part of this is, again, historically with the TGDC, it was somebody made a decision in the very beginning that it was going to be an all-in-one, everything on one device, which from an assistive tech perspective is not a logical approach. You would typically do something like, in a perfect world, say there should be so many ballot marking devices that provide text to speech, not audio navigation, because that's a higher level access feature. Screen enlargement, because 20% of your population can probably use screen enlargement because they have, they're seniors and they just have poor near vision. So you would have devices that provide these set of access features that are used by a whole lot of people, and then have another one with the access features used by far fewer people. I mean, that would be a logical way, but that's not what was done in the beginning, and we're 20 years into this, and it's this anyway. So yes, a lot of that makes sense, but that's not where we are because of the history, unfortunately.
Well, Diane, I actually think what you just described is what we're trying to do here, right? When we're talking about this other ballot marking device, the one that's certified, the Flex, it has all these accessibility that you're talking about, with the exception of this paperless handling, because it is not tied to or has the ability to cast. That is handled separately. And so there's this intent that for those who have that need for that paperless handling, there is this other device that's designated. And so the way that David described this, that's how the RFI came to be. That was the understanding through many discussions with many technical experts through NIST and a handful of others. And so this is where we are, and we don't think that the RFI changes the intent of the requirements, but rather just makes that clarification that you can still see a precinct scanner. You don't have to mark on that precinct scanner, right? Because if you did, then that is your all-in-one. And so maybe the terminology here just needs to change slightly. But the other piece here that I definitely think that this is going in the right direction is in regards to making sure that these are identified properly. To echo Commissioner Hovland, I'm not sure that the VVSG is the place that this can go. However, we do have other places in our policy and our program, the program manuals, which are agreements with the manufacturers. And we can look to do something there in terms of what system goes through certification, we expect to also be advertised or available to the public, right? You're not just creating a device to check all the boxes, get through certification, and then sell something, some subset of that. But that would have to take more consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Waters. Paul Lux, Florida.
I would just like to first, voice my agreement with David's assessment of the original thought behind 2.0 and those 15 original principles of what things needed to do, and that the systems must do all of these things, but then also be accessible to voters who need that kind of extra consideration. I do share Chris's concern about it being in the standard in that way, as far as, because it does appear to be more of a labely thing and not a hard and fast rule about how it's going to work. But at the same time, I understand Diane's concern that, if you have two pieces and piece A and piece B together equal fully accessible, if you stick the label on piece B and it gets deployed without piece A, then do you have an accessible system or don't you? And so I certainly am sympathetic to that concern. I note in the chat that Barbara Gutman has put something out there about accessibility documentation from 5.1-F, and I think that's worth having a look at as it relates to this. And maybe even if we leave Diane's recommendation in there, maybe a circular reference back to 5.1-F would be appropriate, to at very least make sure, because as Diane so aptly pointed out at the last meeting, when and I think it was me and Isaac both that were like, didn't even think about it from that perspective, about that the system says it's certified for accessibility, but I didn't know that it did that, or my poll workers don't know that it did that. And so I think making sure that documentation is there, and that it can have its attention drawn to it appropriately, so that we're doing everything we can in that regard. I appreciate those thoughts.
Thank you, Paul Lux from Florida. Any other comments? Mr. Cho, Colorado.
Thanks, Tom. One is a friendly amendment. It seems like, and maybe I'm misinterpreting the language, but it seems like the casting would come before the verifying. Maybe that's not true. Maybe we're verifying first, then we're casting. But if we're casting first, then maybe the sequence is off. But maybe you're verifying first.
Yeah, so the two different uses for the term verification.
Yeah, that's
The
where I was going.
verification that is problematic for accessibility is not the overvote, undervote thing at the casting point. That is not on people with disabilities radar screen, folks. Not at all. The verification we're talking about is when I make my vote selections and that ballot is printed, I have no idea what I just voted for because I can't see it, pick it up, read it, whatever. So I'm relying on a technology interface, again, to tell me what was printed on the ballot. That's the verification of my vote selections before I cast.
Yeah.
And you know, if it comes back and I made a mistake, then I got to spoil my ballot. But it's at that point, the whole verification at the point of casting overvote, undervote is like, you know, quite frankly, that's for people with significant disabilities voting on a ballot marking device. They already had that happen as part of the whole ballot selection, you know, initial verification process. So that is not a big, beacon for accessibility problems.
Okay, thanks. I wondered where we were in the process. The second thing, and this is more of a problem that people like Mandy and Brian and I may face, and that is because of the problem that Diane's pointing out. We may be in situations where our counties or other jurisdictions are not purchasing or setting up for voting the truly accessible versions of equipment. And then I've got legal problems, which I either have to be the strong arm and tell my jurisdictions what they can and can't do prior to purchase, or I have to throw my weight around at the point in which a county, in our case, is setting up for an election. I'm very sympathetic to the fact that I have that. I can do that in Colorado. I know of other states where they can't. And so I'm thinking of Texas or Illinois or states which are more bottom up. So having a completely accessible system that can be purchased without question is more attractive from a state's perspective than the piecemeal approach here, where somebody could purchase one that's slightly less accessible, and the state might not know it, or the state might not be in a position to be able to enforce it. So just from a meeting accessibility perspective, I'm sympathetic to the fact that we really just need to have accessible systems, because then I don't have to enforce it at the state level.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. David Wagner.
Thank you all for the discussion and the education. This is informative. I was not aware that there are already systems being deployed or evaluated or proposed that are trying to meet accessibility by having two devices, and some one device provides some accessibility modes and the other device provides other accessibility modes. So that makes me, sorry to come back to the concern I raised before, but that makes me think it's more than a theoretical concern. It's actually a significant decision. And I wanted to understand your proposal, Diane. Are you open to the possibility of revisions to your language that would allow a voting system to have accessibility met by two devices? There's no one device that meets every mode, as long as that was like publicly identified or identified in some clear way that you need both those devices for the voting system to be accessible? Or was it your intent that you would like the standards to not certify those kinds of systems and to require there has to be one device that meets all the accessibility modes?
The wording that I proposed was at least one device or set of devices or device combination. I don't care what the wording is. It could even be device parens, for it. It's not the fact that it's an all-in-one. First time I had heard that terminology last time. It's not that fact. The only reason that's reality is because of moving paper, and you just don't move paper, in air 20 feet between two separate pieces of equipment. If we got a paper ballot mandate, so to do the whole process, it's going to be one hardware package, either docked together or physically connected permanently. But AB certifying something that has, and in fact, this all boils down to the automatic paper handling. It's really not the other access features that give people heartburn. It's the automatic paper handling, and it's jurisdictions that count at a precinct level who do not want a separate static ballot box that is not their precinct counter, you know. So, I mean, I get the logistics of why people want a ballot marking device that will work with a separate precinct counter and be the accessible device, and you just can't make it work. It's going to have to be a different kind of device with a ballot box integrated. So yeah, if the wording says, you know, at least one voter facing device or components, you know, identified as a unit or something, that's, you know, not the issue. It's just, I'm going to follow up on Judd's statement. I spent a lot of time in state government doing 508 procurement, and it is an absolute nightmare if you're in that position being the judge without an independent group saying, yes, this meets all the accessibility standards. And I just know election officials they need that support. If they're going to try to make sure that their jurisdictions are deploying something that's fully accessible, then they need to have clear documentation, not buried in some manual someplace, but this is the device that meets all the accessibility requirements in 2.0, or the device combination. And if you unhook these two or do something different, then you're no longer have a fully compliant, you know, accessible device.
So I can be corrected here by our testing and cert team, but when we test and certify a system that's fully accessible to 2.0 standards, and so obviously the products or the components of that, they go to a state, for example. I think that what you saw, but that is our requirement, and there may even be additional documentation of the test report that's public. But I do see where, you know, a simplistic message to the state. Well, let me back up. I do think Brooke Waters' suggestion of the test manual may be a really good way of handling this, because you're getting the registered manufacturers to agree that they're going through it. They're going through the process, and the systems that come out of the testing and are certified, they're going to have to prove that they now have a fully certified accessible system, and then they need to report that, or at least make that available in documentation to the states in which they're going to sell their product, or counties. So I'll let Brooke or John weigh in if I was off base there on what the manufacturers are submitting, and then when they get their system certified.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So this is where earlier in the notes, Commissioner Palmer actually mentioned that we already feel as though some of this wording change that you suggested, Diane, is being met with other requirements, 6.2a, about it. While it doesn't explicitly state there must be at least one, this concept of the voting system has to be able to do this. We intend that whether it's a single device or a combination of devices, right? This is why we don't say the at least one piece, has to meet this from activation all the way through casting, which includes marking and verifying without ever having to touch the ballot and be completely independent. There's a requirement in there for that. And so this ask on a technical stance doesn't really change anything in the standards and what we're already looking at and what's currently under testing and what has currently been certified. The change here would be more about identifying this equipment and making sure that it's very obvious about how to procure it. Unfortunately, my role kind of stops, not completely after certification, because we have post-certification that we do as well, but I'm not part of the procurement or deployment of these systems. I'm not a state official, and we are not a regulatory body. We are simply a set of guidelines, voluntary guidelines, and conformance testing. So this is where in our manuals we can look to do some agreements. with the manufacturers to try to help bridge this, but it might be an issue that just it has to be met at a couple of different levels. And we're not quite going to get that here with just a couple of word changes in the requirements, especially from the technical standpoint. I think we're already meeting what you are pointing out with this at least one. And the issue we're seeing here and talking about with the certified system is it's not well marketed or known which device is which.
Thank you, Brooke. Any other questions or comments before we move on? So there were no other comments received on any other RFI. We've been through the topics that we were going to do. It is now 3:10. We're scheduled to go to 4. It is Friday, but I did promise Mr. Choate that we would talk a little bit about tackling the idea of wireless communications and dealing with the hardware and the voting machines, and sort of where we are with 2.0 with this. And Judd, I'll let you weigh in. I encourage you to make some written comments on this because obviously this is always a topic of discussion, but if you want to start the conversation a bit, and then we'll see where it goes and before we wrap this up.
Yeah, thanks, Don. I appreciate it. So my proposal would be that currently 14.2C, and then there's an allusion to this in 14.2D. 14.2C primarily describes what the system must do regarding wireless communications and what it can't do regarding wireless communications. And it seems to me that if you go through the list, and I'll just start with number 1, voting system must not establish wireless communications. Well, okay, the easiest way for a system not to establish wireless communications is not to have the hardware necessary to do wireless communications. So why don't we put in 2.1 that systems that are submitted for 2.1 review cannot have the hardware necessary to establish a wireless communication. And I personally know that this is a bit of a curveball, and I don't mean to throw curveballs at all of you, but I do think that this is definitely in line with the topics that we're discussing, and it's an obvious area in which voting systems have progressed in substantial ways since we were voting on such things in 2017. I think it would be good for the TGDC to recommend that we eliminate the hardware in systems which can make these kinds of connections, and then work on how that could be rolled out in a 2.1 testing. So that's the proposal, is just to basically say you can't have it in the voting system.
Any comments on that? I see Brooke Waters is raised, unless Commissioner Holland, did you want to weigh in? I see you unmuted yourself. I'll let Commissioner Holland, because I saw the unmute happening in record time. Go ahead.
Thanks. I would just say, and again, I'll default to Brooke or the tech staff here, but I do feel like this is probably a 3.0 conversation. And I'll say, thinking back to 2019 to 2021, obviously this was an area of some concern. And, I think part of what the attempted balance was a desire to allow for more COTS, commercial off-the-shelf technology, to be incorporated into systems. Obviously, sometimes there's less control of what comes there, but that's where it then gets disabled sort of after the fact. That could be, again, I'm happy to hear other things, but, that was certainly part of it, and really in an attempt to try to reinvigorate the marketplace or allow more people to get into the marketplace or keep costs down on voting systems. And so, obviously there's always a challenge of balance here. And so I would just raise those. Certainly, I understand the broad brush stroke concerns about wireless, and am by no means an advocate for it, but I also know that the federal government provided $15 million in security grants last year, which is a joke. And, if we're talking about equipment getting more expensive, to replace all the equipment across the country, you're talking about billions of dollars. And again, trying to think about ways that we could keep costs in mind, the ways that we could support the marketplace. That was certainly some of the concerns when this was considered in 2.0. And so I just throw that out there that, it is a tough conundrum. And I don't think anybody watching this wonders where I feel about funding elections, but certainly if we want all of these things, we have to consider those factors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. Brooke Waters from EAC, I saw your hand up next. I'm just going to go to you real quick.
Sure. I just wanted to echo what Commissioner Hovland really said very nicely, is that a lot of this was put into place because allowing for COTS devices to not include wireless connectivity, it can get more expensive considering nowadays technology, everything's connected to the internet. So when they're acquiring this, all of these requirements in here are with the intention that, like, if you can take it out, take it out. But in some circumstances, your wireless connectivity is soldered into a board. And in that case, what we need to do is make sure we're going through the appropriate steps, or if you have some kind of indicator that wireless was at one point capable, even though you've pulled out the module, that's properly displayed that it has been disabled. And so I just wanted to put that out there for consideration in this conversation. Not that I'm against the recommendation or change, just some history and background on where we are now.
Mr. Caskey, Kansas. Thank you, Brooke.
I appreciate the comments. I agree with Judd on this. From a voter perspective, it's hard for them to say trust us because there's no way to prove that there's nothing hardwired in the system. Like, we can't crack open the devices without invalidating warranties. And I'm a big fan of let the marketplace decide, but in this instance, I'd like to encourage the marketplace to get there a little bit faster. Absolutely, Commissioner Hovland, there's a cost, and absolutely you're correct. But if we could encourage the vendors to get there faster, there's no reason today for there to be wireless components inside of voting equipment. None. Now, if there are jurisdictions that require it, that's up to the jurisdiction. But from my perspective, I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caskey. Judge Cho.
Hey, so to respond to a couple of the points, I do understand that this on its surface looks like a big change. It's actually not, because the components already have to work this way. It's not the pieces of the puzzle already work together in ways that don't permit wireless connectivity, with some very narrow exceptions. The changes here are about the purchase of hardware. And we all know that 2.1 is not going to roll out in December. I mean, it's going to take a while to roll out 2.1, right? We're going to have to set up testing standards. We're going to have to work with our testing agencies and so forth. So it's going to be a while. And then it's going to be a while before the vendors can submit to that new standard. So we have a window of time here where a vendor can work with its subcontractors to make sure that they've got equipment that meet this standard. And I would also note that we have 2 vendors right now that can sell equipment in the marketplace, actively selling equipment in the marketplace that does not have this hardware in it. So it can be done. It's being done right now. I think Brian's correct that this is our opportunity as a group to push the marketplace into a better stance regarding this equipment. And so let's take advantage of that. And I just, not to be overly humorous, but I suspect that if I had President Trump's cell number and gave him a call and asked him, hey, what do you think of this? I think he would love this idea. So since this whole thing is about trying to meet his executive order, let's do the other things too that we think as an industry are good moves forward. And this, I think everybody who's associated with voting equipment believe that this is ultimately where we need to go.
Just for the record, Commissioner Hicks has placed the president's phone number in the chat. This is a public record. We will redact that. Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. I think next was, I have no idea. I think I'm going to go with Mandy Vigil, New Mexico.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, I wanted to kind of just add to, I think, what Judge shared. One, I think this is a topic that I am definitely sensitive to the costs associated and what that looks like. So we've talked about that related to other provisions of making updates. So I think that is a consideration, cost and time for implementation. But I agree that what we've seen with guidelines in the past, it takes time to get there. So I think the time is built in. But beyond that, I think this is a topic that no matter what we've done from a messaging perspective or trying to make sure that we create some sort of physical, barrier to assure voters that our systems are not connected. We know it's not a software connection. That is definitely clear. It's the hardware. And we've created, seals, anything we can do to assure it has not been enough. There is just always this perception and this concern that systems are connected to the internet. So from my perspective, this makes a lot of sense. I think it would be helpful to just cure that question altogether, and it would provide a lot of trust back in the system in a way that we can't do otherwise.
Thank you, Mandy. Paul Lux from Florida.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would just say that it's probably no secret, although I don't remember how many people left on the board were there when I first joined the board, and we had these discussions back in early days, that I was a very vocal proponent of the need for this. Not just on behalf of myself. I know that there are plenty of jurisdictions across the United States who have any number of issues as it relates to the need for this type of election night reporting. And yes, I know we went 3 rounds with this, and I know I came out on the losing end the first time, and I'm happy to come out on the losing end again. But I will say that there is a legitimate need for this in certain jurisdictions. People who have geography problems, take a look at Monroe County, Florida. It stretches from the tip of Florida all the way down through the Keys. And if one of those offices has to be where every memory device has to make its way to in order for you to report your election night results, someone has to be prepared to tell the ravenous media on election night and the ravenous political parties on election night, cool your jets and wait, because we don't have the means to report this instantaneously.
All right.
I think certainly I would agree with Judd and his assertion that if he were to call President Trump, he is going to agree. And yes, we absolutely have an ongoing public perception problem of the machines being connected to the internet, whether it's true or not true. But is there an outside vendor solution that does not tie this to the voting equipment itself? Absolutely, and we discussed that before we finally arrived at the end of 2.0. So I'd be interested to hear. I see Christopher has his hand up. I'll be interested to hear where they're going with this. But I just wanted to again point out that the need for this doesn't cease just because we get rid of it.
Thank you, Paul. Kevin's been waiting for a while. So Kevin Skogel, please.
Thank you very much. So I also strongly support the idea of making this a prohibition and complete and total. The cybersecurity working group discussed this at length. We talked about it for over a year. We talked about all the potential use cases. We talked about device configuration and management and accessibility and reporting precinct results. We looked at all the technologies from Wi-Fi to VPNs and out-of-band management and you name it. We thought of everything possible and concluded unanimously that they should not include wireless devices, should not be able to be present. It was after everyone had reviewed the text, including the TGDC and the different boards, that the language was changed to make it so that a configuration change was possible, that it was possible to disable them through configuration. But that was not the recommendation that anyone had made up until that point. And I still strongly think, I've in the past have done research where I've found voting systems that were online. These are 1.0 systems, and since then they've been mitigated. But this is a real issue, and I think having them removed completely is the only sound way to go.
Thank you, Kevin. Chris Woloshin.
Well, as a lifelong cybersecurity technologist, I strongly agree personally with Kevin Skoglund, Judge Choate, and others in their desire to ban all types of external communications. Some manufacturers are already building systems to this spec, but as Brian pointed out, the marketplace will speak. There's a half a dozen states where the use of wireless is codified in their law for reasons of geography or expediency. And these states choose not to use an EAC certified version of software. They use a one-off that the manufacturers prepare and build for them to support this external communications. Someone, I'm not sure who said that maybe this is a 3.0 issue to address, to give not just the manufacturers more runway, but the election officials themselves who are demanding this capability to educate them, as Kevin suggested, on how to do it better or differently. One final point, after that public working group, I'm aware of at least one manufacturer that reached out to Dell Computers, IBM, and HP to ask them what it would take to produce a line of laptops or desktops that are used for election management system. What would it take to produce a line of those pieces of equipment that have zero wireless embedded in them, Bluetooth, anything like that? And from a cost-benefit analysis perspective, none of them thought it would be a good idea to produce a small niche only to be used in election systems for these types of laptops and desktops that don't have wireless. So long story short, manufacturers are very well aware of this. We're currently building systems, software and hardware systems that do not have this capability. But some states will continue to demand it, and we'll have to figure out how to deal with that. Thank you.
So Chris, you mentioned, there's a little conflict in what your statement is, obviously. If it wasn't nuanced, it wouldn't be hard, right? I guess the issue is, you're mentioning the hardship. Do manufacturers have a hardship in obtaining the COTS that is free of the wireless hardware? But apparently some of the manufacturers are doing it and preparing for that. So what am I missing here? If it's sort of cost prohibitive, that's one thing, but obviously it's not cost prohibitive for some manufacturers.
The large equipment manufacturers of these systems like Dell, HP, and IBM have indicated that there's no benefit to them to produce a small run of equipment that has zero wireless capability. So what some manufacturers are doing are buying this equipment and then modifying it, removing any and all wireless, Bluetooth, cellular communications at a cost that is passed on to the election jurisdiction.
Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Choate from Colorado.
Thanks, Don. So a couple of things. It seems like there are jurisdictions, and this makes a lot of sense to me. There are jurisdictions that are just different than Colorado. we're landlocked and we don't have islands and that kind of thing. So my understanding is that Alaska has certain needs that are very different than Colorado, and I think Paul's pointed out that Florida might have needs that are very different, but we are setting an industry standard. So that's what our responsibility is. So our responsibility is to create the guidelines for the industry, the guidelines for the equipment generally. And I think the guidelines for the equipment generally should be, it should not have wireless capability. All of that should go away. Now, if people want to operate outside of those industry guidelines, that is totally up to them. And they can either not adopt those guidelines and create their own guidelines, or not have any guidelines. But so that's one option, or they can purchase at the older guidelines. So 1.0 permits this activity, and frankly, 2.0 permits it. So if you could find a system at 1.0 or 2.0, you could certainly purchase like that. So I think there are avenues for states and jurisdictions that are differently situated. But we are the group that's supposed to be thinking about guidelines for the industry as a whole. And so since we already have a VVSG 2.0, which says, hey guys, you can't use it. The hardware can have it, but you can't use it. Well, so it shouldn't be all that hard to say, okay, now in 2.1, you just can't have it in the system. You couldn't use it before, now you just can't have it in the system. So I don't feel like this is a big move. I certainly don't think that it requires moving to a 3.0. And I would just note, and not trying to be critical, but it took us 15 years to get from 1.0 to 2.1 or 2.0. So I know that we're hopefully not on the line. We're not, on the trajectory for another 15 years, but let's not take something that I think we have broad agreement about and just punt it to 10 years from now, when we could get to a solution now, because we're in the midst of making a change to 2.1.
Thank you, Judd. Kevin Skoglund.
So I had two things. One is, we are sensitive to the use case that Paul brought up, right, where you might have geographic concerns about reporting, but there are other ways of dealing with that outside the voting system, right? You can have a regional center where all of the results are brought, and then they can be transferred, via a separate air-gapped laptop to another location. So it's not like you necessarily have to have the precinct device itself reporting in. You can take them to a central location in southern Okaloosa to report to northern Okaloosa or whatever. So I think that's a very viable and good security practice. And then the other thing, I think, to Judd's point, I think this is a reasonable scale change to make, because if my recollection is correct, it's just a change in the discussion. The requirement is, as written, is not. It says that you can't have wireless voting, but the discussion text says so long as it cannot be enabled, right? So as long as it's not configured, there's no wireless drivers present. So I think it really is just in that discussion section where things got weakened, and so I don't think it's a large change to make.
Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. Skoglund.
Hey, Don, I would be interested to hear what John and Brooke have to say about, again, how I'm talking theoretically, and I understand that. John and Brooke have to worry about, on the ground, how do we work with our testing partners to actually create the conditions to put this into practice. So is it possible we could hear from them?
So, Ms. Waters or Mr. Panic, if I see your mute is off, Ms. Waters, do you want to address that, or would you rather do it, Mr. Panic?
We both can weigh in a little bit. I would just echo what I had stated earlier, as well as what Commissioner Hovland had stated, that we're all looking at it from one perspective here, but when you're actually a part of this hardware design and procurement to go into these systems, it can get very costly. Now, cost is not something that our division worries about, but we understand that there are some obstructions to obtaining this equipment realistically. And so having this other avenue forward is really where the current 2.0 system lives. And I'm not entirely sure, because I'm not a developer, what it would take, whether with communications with other vendors or time. But the pieces here were to still go through the steps and having our labs, our voting system test laboratories, go through the steps to really ensure that this equipment is not connected to the internet, even though there may be traces of, well, at one point it had the capability of being connected. There's an external emblem of the wireless. How do we know for sure that that's no longer connected? Well, we've done that, and it has our certification attached to it. And so that is our evidence that it has gone through and tested to that. It may seem simple to just completely remove it, but it can be, there are barriers. And sorry, I believe I interrupted you, Commissioner Palmer.
Oh, I was just going to ask, do we provide a request documentation from the manufacturer, and is there additional documentation we could require? I'm just asking, from that testing campaign, process, what's required of the manufacturer?
Yeah, the manufacturer is required to document how wireless is disabled through what functionality. But what we're considering here, a wider ban on devices that contain hardware that even could be made capable for wireless communications. I just wanted to make one comment on, like, from a logistical perspective, what the test labs have to do. This does present a challenge with respect to custom modified hardware. As Mr. Voloshin pointed out, that in order to achieve this, a manufacturer has to procure the equipment that already has the wireless hardware built into it by default, and then they have to physically go in and disconnect those surface mount soldered components to the PCB itself. Doing that on the lab level, testing that, it's possible. It's just not ideal conditions to actually crack the machines open and then take a look at a PCB to see that it's been modified on a component level. Those things are not obvious at all. So we would need to have some probably additional documentation language in here that has the manufacturers describe what those modifications will, how to actually check that.
John, you actually froze for a little bit, so can you go back like 10 seconds of what you were saying?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, thank you. I was just saying that it would be important for the manufacturers to describe.
Oh my God.
That part of the
what
conversation
Right at the
is
key
censored.
point.
It's censored.
Document what modifications were made to the custom hardware.
And just to tack on to that, when you do have modified COTS, that does also change the testing that undergoes in like a hardware chamber, hardware testing environment. If it's a modified COTS component, it goes through additional testing because now you're changing something that was already ready for the commercial market, that had safety testing done, UL. Well, now that you've made a change, how do we know that it's still safe? Now that has to undergo more detailed testing. So it does extend on the testing as well when they go through that. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it does add extra steps. The manufacturer, I believe, bears that cost, Jed.
Thank you. I really appreciate you, John and Brooke. I really do appreciate you, you both. Mandy Vigil.
Thanks, Commissioner. I just wanted to kind of share my takeaway from not only the conversation on the wireless, But just on the other three primary topics we were talking about, in particular, the common data format. And it feels to me like what we're discussing is complex, a lot of great conversation today. But does this feel like the best approach, best use of resources would just be to focus on the 3.0? Like that feels to me like where we're getting with a lot of our discussion of they don't feel minor, they feel important, but they are complex. And so I'm curious if that's, the direction we should really be using our resources for.
Well, that's a big picture issue. I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, I think in some ways when we did 2.0, it's a recognition this was a major change in both hardware and software. And this version will be with us for probably this version, which we might add on to with 2.1, 2.2. This will be with us for a decade or more. Discussion about 3.0, which would be a much more significant change, both in hardware and software, again, after many more years of technology. This is a little bit of my opinion here, but it would be down the road. And we do have a life cycle policy that looks at this issue every year. And we've had public comments, we've had comments from our FACA boards, our advisory boards, and then they provide feedback on how they might want to change it. Most of these are going to tweak 2.0, just like we're doing with 2.1. I mean, down the road, there may be a 2.2. We want to make sure we're keeping up with the technology, but we're probably going to leave the 3.0 to major changes in both software and hardware. And again, I think John Panic has a pretty good handle on sort of the iterations of 2.0 and then where we would go with 3.0. Again, I'm speaking for myself, but I think that we're seeing this as minor changes or changes that can be incorporated into 2.0 standard. John, did you want to have anything to add on that on 2.0 to 3.0?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the big thing to underscore is that the determination of a major versus a minor revision to the VVSG is determined by backward compatibility rather than whether or not something feels like it's a big change or a small change. So they can be considered in that context, whether or not. So a wireless ban, for example, is backward compatible wireless restriction. And so I don't see that necessitating a 3.0. But that, could be up for further discussion. I'm not
This may be the last
sure
time
that
for
it's.
John. John, what was that last part?
I'm sorry, did I break up again?
You did.
That a wireless band system is backward compatible with a wireless restricted system, and so that could live in a 2.1.
Thank you, John. Any other comments on this issue?
I just want to note that I personally think that we could start looking at a 3.0, but not necessarily in the sense that we are going to put it through to our adoption and our other FACA boards. I just mean that we've already been collecting feedback for the last couple of years and we'll continue to do so and separate it out into what might be considered a minor versus a major revision. So for this conversation in 2.1, I still think that we want to move forward with this. But just because we're talking about some things that may go into a 3.0 doesn't mean I want to table that conversation and say, we'll get to it in a decade. I would love to talk about it now and continue to massage that feedback. So when it comes time, it's not as large of an undertaking. So I do appreciate you bringing that up, Mandy, and open to feedback, and anything here that's not incorporated, just know that we are still recording all of this information and trying to prepare for the future as well.
Thank you, Brooke. Judge Choate.
So just sort of massaging Mandy and Brooks and John's points, I'm going to make one more pitch. So here we are. We're all in a room. We're all sort of queued up for a vote because, we're considering some changes to adopt a 2.1. We all live in this technical world. We live in well, many of you live in a much more technical world than I do, but we live in the industry, right? And in the industry, we have to think about things like, can we buy that piece of equipment? How easy is it for our vendor to do this? Will it cost us more? Outside of our world, there are hundreds of millions of Americans who think about these things once every 2 years, or think about these things when they come up in the news cycle. Wouldn't it be great if we could say to them, hey, you know, we have these standards that say we can't use this stuff, but guess what? The industry is actually removing them. We're actually mandating that if you want to play in the big sandbox where the guidelines represent, you know, 2/3 of the U.S. consumers, you cannot have this equipment in the hardware, period. That being able to say that to the world, and that we are like on a relatively quick timeline to get to the point where we don't have that available for people that want to purchase a 2.1 system. That's gold, people. That's like where we should be at. You know, this is what we as a group, the TGDC, should be doing, is forging that ground, getting us to those standards that are sort of life-changing for how elections are perceived in America. So I think it's really important we take advantage of this opportunity that's in front of us and not think about, yes, we can do that in 3.0, and maybe 3.0 is 2 years away, but probably it's more like 6 or 8 years away. So let's do it now, because we're here and we can do it. And so take advantage of the opportunity.
Thank you for your comments, Judd. We appreciate them. That's very helpful. And, you know, this has been a topic of discussion, and so I think we're pretty closely aligned. Any other comments on this? Really, there were no other RFIs, so we've been talking about the external communications issue, and I would ask you, Judd, if you could, you know, put those comments for the record, because I know the team's always looking at that. So just want to make sure we have it in writing, so we can review and sort of analyze that.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So those are the topics of today. Obviously, I'm going to open it up for some open discussion or questions. Any more comments or questions? I think, Wesley, you may have had a question.
Yes, Commissioner Palmer, thank you very much. My question, and first off, I'll apologize for us bringing this back up because it's been discussed on the 2 previous calls that we've had concerning the pending appointments to this board. I was asked at a function earlier this week why the pending members who have been appointed by whatever the body that appoints them have to go through an additional vetting process. I believe the vetting process that was mentioned last week was they had to go to the White House for some sort of vetting process. And, you know, I didn't know the answer. I read the charter. I read portion of HAVA where it talks about the TGDC, and I don't see any requirements in either of those documents. So to be able to answer that question, maybe someone on here can answer that for me.
So I'll do the best I can. We have our general counsel here. I mean, I think that, you know, the Help America Vote Act clearly states that the appointments to the TGDC are appointed jointly by the EAC and NIST. And so your concerns are legitimate on the length of time it takes. In my opinion, having gone through both the clearance process and an executive branch vetting, the process of vetting is similar to the clearance process, and except there's not a clearance on the other side of that rainbow. It's pretty much in addition to the clearance process. So vetting has been a part of this process on this committee for a number of administrations, including the current administration. Back when I did it, it seemed to go faster, but I had to do fingerprints. I had FBI agents call me. I mean, it was an entire vetting process. And so just like on a clearance or a vetting process, some of these things take time, short time, long time, and it really is something that I can't really speculate. I mean, all I know is that some of our appointees have been going through this for a number of years in previous administrations and now the current administration. And I don't know how much I can really comment on that, except we're just part of the process at the EAC, and the NIST also has a process because it's part of the executive branch. There's a vetting process that takes place. So with that, I'll shut up. And if there's anything, Camden, that I missed or failed to address with that, please weigh in.
I don't have anything additional other than Leslie to the difference from the other boards, right, is the joint appointment, and Department of Commerce has a very spelled out process. And as the joint appointment, we follow that process, and that's their vetting process. But that is the reason that it's different from the other boards.
Thank you. So I think Judd's hand was up next. Judd.
I have a different topic. So if anybody is still talking about the appointment topic, I defer to them.
I have a
Mandy,
very
Gino?
quick follow-up. Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Camden, you said the Department of Commerce process is spelled out. Can you share that? That would be helpful, I think, maybe to some of the gaps that we're seeing.
So,
So Barbara, did you want to weigh in, Barbara?
hold on one second. We're having a small technical.
Okay.
Okay. The Department of Commerce, NIST, runs multiple FACA boards, even more than the EAC runs, which is quite a goodly number for the size of your agency. And this is the process we use with all of our FACA appointments. We have some basic background checks, and we run it through. We run it through this process. It's taking its time, but this is the process we use for the FACA committee that analyzes how buildings fall down, that did the 9/11 report. It's the process we use for our visiting committee for science. It's a process we use for our advisory committee for information, cybersecurity, and privacy. And I believe you get the forms, we send them into our security office. It goes to the Office of White House Liaison for clearance. And this is the process we've used for as long as I've been involved with these things. And I'm sorry, I wish everything took less time than it does. I've been a federal employee for many, many years. I wish a lot of things took less time, but that is the process.
If I can just follow up, I think part of it, the time is an issue, obviously. Echo.
Barbara, go ahead and mute yourself. Yeah. All right.
Acoustic
Diane.
feedback there. Yeah, the time is one issue, but in terms of the access board appointments, one of them was actually rejected. So this does feel different. And at least in terms of the access board, they're trying to figure out, they can't seem to figure out why their appointment was rejected. And until they know that, they're reluctant to nominate somebody else. So
I can tell you that our process is the same. I don't have insight into why that one was rejected.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Diane. Judd Choate. Oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, go ahead, Judd. And I'll get to you, Commissioner Hicks. I apologize.
Well, if the commissioner again has anything on this topic, I have a different topic.
Oh, that's right.
So
Commissioner Hicks, did you? Yeah.
No, I appreciate the frustration that folks are going through. And Judd, you just put something in there that made me want to think about that in terms of it only took you a month to go through this. And so I guess the frustration is the length of the time and what exactly is happening at each point. And folks, it's more of a wanting to know what is exactly happening as opposed to, well, this is the process that we're following. And so I think that's more of the frustration from folks. So if someone can get through in a month and it takes someone 2 years and they're still not on, that's where the questions are coming from. And it's not a, knock on the current administration, because this has been going on for the last administration as well. So, so I guess it's more of a, if the folks over at NIST could lay that out, and Barbara, I'm not asking you to do that. It's more of a, if the general counsel wants to come on and say, hey, this is how we do this, step by step sort of thing. And you sort of started that at the end of that. So I think that's more of it, just to give people a better understanding of what's going on with that. So that's it overall. And thank you,
Commissioner
Chairman.
Hicks. Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. One thing that I did notice, of course, the charter states that individuals who are going to be replaced can continue to serve on the TGDC. Sometimes the nominating organization, though, the person may no longer be a part of that organization, or they have their own conditions of service, for example, or their intention to replace someone. But, I believe in our charter, it basically states that even though a member is going to be replaced, they can continue to serve. So I think we need to be more sensitive to that, and work with the nominating committees or the folks that are able to nominate people and say, I understand that this person may be leaving, or you want to replace them, but until that's final, you should continue to have the current individual continue to serve, and have the other person be a part of the, you can be part of the committee and listen and even provide feedback, but not necessarily vote. So I think that we're going to be obviously more tuned to this moving forward. And I thank you for the comments. So we'll move on to Judge as a new issue. Judge.
Well, I just to follow up on that last one, I think that the Obama administration was just far less discerning. I should have been through a two-year review just like everybody else.
We all know that, Judd. We do.
That's right.
We've vociferously objected, but we were overturned here. Or veto is, there you go.
Completely understand. So yeah, I mean, things obviously are just different now. I did at the beginning of last week, or maybe this week. Gosh, they all run together. The beginning of this week, I made the motion that we just stop meetings until we get a more, I think, appropriate membership, because it seems like the Access Board is just not represented. It's certainly not represented from a voting perspective, and I'm very uncomfortable with that. I do really appreciate Kathy being on, especially considering that I peppered her with questions, and I do worry that we're in a position right now with the Access Board where we don't have people who are being represented here who really understand these issues as sort of a mile deep, and that's worrisome to me, because I would love for us to have systems which meet all of the accessibility needs of our voters, but also because, and not to be selfish, but when the lawsuit happens, it's not going to come to the EAC, and it's not going to come to NIST. The lawsuit's going to be at me. The lawsuit's going to be at the chief election official in the state. I'm not the chief election official, but I'll be the chief election official lawyer. So we're the ones that are going to get sued, or it's going to be Paul or Mary or Isaac. I mean, somebody's going to get sued here, and that's the problem. The problem is that are we looking around every corner to see what's coming and preparing ourselves for the possibility that we are, violating somebody's accessible needs, and in doing so, potentially in violation of federal law. So that's why I feel like it's so important. That's why I keep pushing on this, even though, frankly, me, I'm not. This is getting all tied up in the process stuff is sort of annoying to me. That's not where my head's at. But it feels like this is really important. So I withdraw my motion, but I note that the problem still exists, and I don't see a solution to the problem. Other than, again, I appreciate that Kathy was here today. But Don, you just brought up something that makes me think. Maybe there are previously confirmed members of the Access Board that are out there wandering the world that we could draw back in to the TGDC to represent those interests in the interim. Is that something that we could pursue to meet our short-term needs? Or are there other possible ways to fill that gap? So I'm just trying to think outside the box and not be obstructionist, and try to figure out if there's ways that we can meet these requirements without, suspending the work of this group, and frankly, maybe taking the TGDC out of the process entirely.
So I think to your larger point, and of course we're going to continue to work with the Access Board. We work with them on a number of projects here at the EAC with our disability section. And of course, the Board of Advisors have, when we had a Board of Advisors meeting, we discussed preliminary some of these issues. The Access Board was represented on there. I don't want to speculate as to, we can't speculate as to why the member, the current chair member of the Access Board isn't here today. But I would say that he was at the Board of Advisors meeting and was able to make comments, to the EAC. And I would just say our independent charge as an agency, we go through, we get the best advice we can, the technical advice from state officials and experts, is that we have an independent duty that voters with disabilities will be able to vote privately and independently. And I think we've done a great job of advancing the standards as technology has improved. The initial part of HAVA, there were some lawsuits. But I think for a long time, the Department of Justice has been satisfied with the accessibility of the voting machines, and quite pleased with that. The ADA has done, or the different part of DOJ has done some, site visits, and that can always continues to be an issue. But I think that we're doing pretty well. And so we have an independent, duty with that. We will continue the process with whatever advice we had received from the committee, from the TGDC, and then we'll continue. Our executive director will open this up to the public, to groups that represent voters with disabilities. And obviously the Access Board is represented on the Board of Advisors as well as other disability organizations. So, and your other issue is been in communications with the Access Board, and we were able to bring on an expert from the Access Board today, and I'm sure we've developed a relationship with our previous member of the TGDC who served for a long time. He's still the executive director of the Access Board. So that's sort of my comments to that. Mandy, your hand is up.
Thanks, Commissioner. I do have one follow-up question on kind of understanding next steps. My understanding from the Standards Board meeting, I kind of asked a similar question. So my understanding is that the trigger really for next steps are a recommendation from the TGDC. And I know we have not, I've been assured there's not going to be a vote. So we're still working on getting everyone seated. So from, my takeaway is we have not provided that recommendation. There's still hope that we'll get folks seated to keep moving forward. But can you clarify kind of what comes next?
Well, I think that the group should be provided an opportunity of additional week to provide written comments. I think that, there's been some examples of consensus resolutions. I would say that the next step is to, we appreciate the comments, the written comments and the comments and the discussion. And this is really for the benefit of our executive director, as I stated in our comments. She's going to take the draft of the VVSG 2.1. She's going to incorporate and make some decisions with the staff on what changes need to be made. And then that would be placed to the Board of Advisors and to the Standards Board for their input, as well as public comment. There'll be opportunities for groups and individuals to provide comments on the VVSG 2.1 changes. So that really is the sort of the next step is our executive director will take in this feedback, and there'll be another week of opening for the TGDC. I frankly think that this group either can continue to provide independent comments, just like we have done in the past, just on what changes should be made to the VVSG. And so we're always open. But I think formally, as a group, one more week of written comments would be appropriate. And I know that then the executive director will be working toward what will be a draft for the other FACA boards to consider.
Hey, Don, I had a follow-up question to that. So my reading of section 222 of HAVA is that to start the review process of a change to the VVSG, you need a recommendation from the TGDC. So we haven't provided that. I recommend you put together all of our comments over the next week, 2 weeks, however long you need, and bring it back to us. And then we give you that recommendation, either yes or no. Then you can go on to the other boards. If you don't do that first box checking, I think you're violating 222 of HAVA.
So I'll let my general counsel weigh in if he wants to. I don't agree with that, but I'll let our general counsel weigh in if he has an opinion. I can expand on my understanding of the Help America Vote Act.
Yeah, so Judd, just in response, we read 222 to certainly say that if a recommendation is provided, it must be considered, but not as a starting point. So I'm not sure what the chair laid out what he sees as the timeline upcoming. So that aside, though, I would just provide the response that certainly from the EAC perspective, it's that you must have the opportunity to provide a recommendation, but the following steps, that is not a precondition to those following steps. So if we did 6 more meetings and a recommendation wasn't met, the EAC still wouldn't be prevented from moving forward with a VVSG process under our read of those sections of HAVA. Now, what those next steps look like in getting to a recommendation or consensus, I'll leave to the discretion of the commissioners and the executive director. The executive director specifically, given that HAVA does call that out explicitly. But that's the response to the read on that section of HAVA.
Just to follow up, are you familiar, Camden or others on the screen, with any time in the history of the EAC and the VVSG where a change to the VVSG did not start with a recommendation of the TGDC?
I'll turn it back over because my memories run out in 2019, 2020, or 2020. So for those with a longer recollection, I'd dig into your memory as well.
Well, Jed, I would just say that during my time on the TGDC, it was sometimes maddening, but there were very few votes, if any, and it was all based on consensus. And when you look at some of the past resolutions, they weren't resolving on particular, they didn't really, sometimes they didn't come to positions. It was, these things are important to us, or we're concerned about a lack of a quorum of the EAC. You know, they were not paragraph by paragraph, line by line feedback. And so that's been my experience. And when you go back and look at the resolutions, that's generally what it is. And I don't think that my time on the TGDC we ever had a vote. It was just more of a consensus on building toward the next standard and what should be considered. That's just one member.
I'm going to jump in here just because I've been on basically since 1.0. I was not on for that adoption, but from 1.1 on, and I have just the opposite perspective, which is it was me and the access board people, and our jobs on here was to make sure anything that moved forward from the TGDC was solid when it came to accessibility. Now, I have to say we didn't do so well because we kept getting undermined, and anyway, it hasn't worked out the way we actually thought it would, but and Ben, I was very reluctant to vote for 2.0 with the software independence requirement and blah, 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 but finally acquiesced. So I do remember votes, and they weren't all, holding hands, singing. There was a lot of compromise involved. So again, accessibility is very, very different from, it's a legal mandate that has its own legal legs far outside of this. This just happens to be a standard setting group that overlaps into a bunch of civil rights things. And I don't know, I would feel very uncomfortable about something moving forward that does not have the sanction of this group.
Mr. Wagner.
I don't know if it's helpful, but I thought I'd share my perspective that I think if a standard moves forward without starting from a formal vote and recommendation from this body, that feels to me like it would be a change from past practice. Any legal considerations are beyond me. I have no idea what the law requires or what is good or what is not good. But my memory of the processes that have been followed for the past standards for VVSG 1.1 and for 2.0 at least was that the initial drafting was led under the leadership of the TGDC with NIST supporting and working with the EAC, and that there were many informal consensus steps along the way, but that in each case the process at the TGDC level concluded with the TGDC taking a formal vote to approve a draft and transmit it to the EAC as the TGDC's recommendation. So to me, not having that step happen on 2.1 seems like it would be a difference in process compared to what has happened in the past ones that I'm familiar with.
Well, it's the will. Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate that. It really is the will of the body to see if they to advance with recommendations, including if you, for example, we had a new discussion today on the wireless ban issue. If it really has to come from the membership, if there's going to be a formal resolution or recommendation.
All right. So Don, you have put the ball in my court. I make the motion that this group consider the potential changes to the VVSG for 2.1 and take a formal vote as to whether to recommend those to the EAC to go forward to the other boards. And that, we spend the requisite time, maybe the next week, 10 days, 2 weeks, to consider what those changes might be so that we can then either get together as a group or perhaps through electronic vote, cast our votes for those potential changes in creating 2.1.
So I'm going to break this down a little bit. Got a couple questions, and maybe the general counsel might need to weigh in. So I think it's very possible for our team, and they're very good to make some of the recommendations that were offered today, and based on your input, and send that draft to you, giving that draft to you, and then have you comment on that or vote. Now, you say vote. I guess the question I have for the general counsel is, can we vote remotely? Is that possible to do, or does we have to be in a meeting like this, Camden?
I would recommend to the commission that with Judd's motion that be taken up at a meeting, at a public meeting, in discussion, as the best way to do this. would be the advice of GC here. So, Judd, I take your motion to mean you want to take the question of consensus, sufficient time to review. I would suggest to this group and to the commission that that be done and taken up at a future public meeting of the TGDC.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to you, Judd. Could you give us a little bit more structure on what the question will be?
Yeah, so I think what we do is we take the next week to 10 days, however long the EAC team needs, to create the wording and changes to be resubmitted back to the TGDC for their review. Then maybe say another week for us to review, and we schedule a meeting for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long that is from now. And we could put the sole item on the agenda is discussion and vote on 2.1 language.
Okay. Mandy, you have your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I think Judd's recommendation that he just went through, I agree with that approach to this. The only item that I think remains up for consideration is I think there's also been a consensus from this group that we all feel strongly that accessibility is a critical issue. We want to get it right. Is there opportunity to get somebody to participate from that perspective that has some understanding of kind of the specifics of voting, so that we don't come to that same question the next time we're here?
Well, I disagree with you, Mandy. I believe we've heard a lot of discussion on the accessibility features under 2.0 and what are some of the concerns. We've had them in this public discussion and we've had it in writing. And our team, to be frank, the EAC team, we're focused on this like a laser beam. So I disagree with that. But did you want to second Judd's motion?
Mandy
And
can't
what if I
second Judd's
could?
motion.
What if I
Okay.
could?
So I think there's a motion. I will say this is we are somewhat constrained by the what do you call it? The APA, I guess, or just the notice requirements. And so this may be August 21st or something like that, even if we put it out today. Would that be correct, Camden?
I will second. Let me second Judd's motion so that we can properly
Okay.
discuss Judd's motion. Now, Judd, was your motion to take that vote right now, or was your motion to take that vote after we see a review of the reworked proposed 2.1?
It's to view the revisions and then vote.
Okay, then I absolutely second that motion.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Other than the stuff we already had.
Yeah, so just to jump in on, thank you, Paul, for formalizing the motion. So the discussion is under FACA specifically, 15-day. We must notice a public meeting 15 days in advance. I think it fits within the timeline we've described anyway, so I don't think there's any issues there. We will identify the time for that public meeting to consider the motion if it carries, and then we'll post it appropriately. But I would tell you that's a non-issue from my end as far as actually getting it noticed. So
Okay. We'll let you guys know on the notice. Commissioner Hovland.
I was just going to say, I mean, I appreciate the time sensitivity, but certainly there's been a lot thrown out there today. I know that the demands on our staff to address that, the coordination with NIST, none of this happens necessarily overnight. And I think that we've seen issues and challenges related to sort of not having things in front of us or whatever. I guess I would recommend that we at least allow enough time to get that right and worked out so there's not confusion. Again, there were a lot of sort of new things thrown out today that probably need to be scoped or are not written yet, or etc. So I just rather than prematurely scheduling a meeting that then spirals out again, I would think it's worth taking a few more days to make sure that we get things ironed out.
Thank you, Commissioner Hoagland. I think we'll get together with the AFDO and with NIST and see if we can find a date that obviously conforms to the notice requirements. Mr. Kramer, South Carolina.
Yeah, I would echo that. If we can please not do it in 2 weeks, let's give everyone ample time to review. I know that the National Election Center Conference is that week. There will be a lot of election officials there. So I would try to give us some time to review, since a lot of things has been talked about. We're also in the middle of election seasons in a lot of parts of the country. So, the more time to review something, the better. And my ask would be, maybe when there is changes made, that there could be an explanation, maybe grouping that change. So say, hey, we made this change. Here's why, based on this feedback. And this is what it's doing. So that way, when we get all back together, we're not just discussing every change that was made, and then prolonging even more time, and 4 hours or 5 hours of time that would be having on a call. So my two things would be extend the period of time out to probably past the end of the month. And then part two of that would be, please, if you can, any suggested spots of change, we would have an explanation based on the conversations we've had. And
Isaac, are you asking for a red line version, basically?
yes, that'd be great.
I don't know if that's possible, but that's
I don't know if it's possible, but if it could, or something could be done, because I think we want to honor everyone's time and their commitment to this committee. And to, I'm new. I was one of those people that took over 1.5 years to be on this committee. So, there are things to catch up on too in that regard. So having those explanations are very helpful in this dialogue. So that's just me. Take it what it is. I'm just hoping for more time in review.
Thank you, Isaac. Diane.
Just to clarify for me, extended time is really helpful, because I'm here representing so many different factions of the disability community, and there's a coalition that only meets once a month. And so if I don't catch one of those standing meetings, and I have to reach out to, Michelle Bishop at National Disability Rights Network, and somebody at AAPD, and somebody at National Federation of the Blind, and somebody at the American Council of the Blind, and I need to verify, not only do I need time to do that, to vet everything, but then I need the okay that whatever comes out is public information, so it can be shared widely with stakeholders so I'm bringing back their feedback and vetting for, any vote I decide to cast.
Thank you for that.
So it's okay. Everything that comes out in this communications will be public.
Thank you, Diane.
Well, that was a question.
So maybe I missed
Yes.
it. What was the question?
Inflection, yes.
Could you repeat the question, Diane?
That all of the drafts that come out, the edits, the proposed changes, that's all public information.
Everything that's
limited.
been communicated back and forth, every red line and draft, that's all, let's say they're public or foiable, one of the two. So everything we do is pretty much open to the public.
Perfect.
Okay, so given this conversation, can I revise my motion to say 1 week for us to provide our comments, another week for the EAC to put those comments into a draft, we receive that draft and have it for, and now I defer to the group, but let's say 10 days, 2 weeks, and then we meet and vote. So at the max, where that would be 4 weeks from now? Put us in early September. I'm happy to change my motion to that.
And I will second that motion as amended.
I would send that as a recommendation because we're going to have to work with obviously the EAC team to make sure we're available, plus the NIST. So we'll work to give you that. I would say I would make that a recommendation.
Not less than?
Well, and I would say certainly
Whatever-
because as Camden said, you all have to have 15 days to advertise, but our 10-day review can be part of that 15 days. So, I
Right.
mean, that
So
doesn't
we'll
mean you
find a-
can't advertise it out there and still give us that same time that Judd has recommended.
Our goal is to find something outside the 15 days that works for obviously the group and for as much as possible, and then obviously the NIST and EAC staff. So I think we'll be fine. So I think we've got the nature of the motion, I believe. Judd, you want to repeat it one more time?
Yeah, so my motion is that we as a group have a week to provide our notes to the EAC regarding potential changes to the new 2.1 VVSG. Then the EAC has a week to turn those recommended changes back around to the TGDC in written form, probably a red line version, which I think we all need. And now I'm going to say 2 weeks. Then we as a group have 2 weeks to review those changes or take them to our outside groups that we represent so that we can get their thoughts on those changes. And then we schedule a meeting, or well, the meeting would have been scheduled, but we will have a meeting then at the end of those 2 weeks in which we discuss those changes, potentially make small revisions at that point, but hopefully it's something that would be relatively final. And then we vote on those changes at the end of those 2 weeks. So a week, 2 weeks.
So I think it's going to work out. I think that would be a recommendation, though. So is there a second for the motion?
I already made a second.
Any more discussion on the? All right. On the question, what are the ayes? Do we?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries. Thank you. Is there any other comments or questions for the team or for each other?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everyone for pushing this through in terms of sitting down and actually talk through it. It's 3.5 hours that folks have been on this call. I know it's not easy. I appreciate each of you doing this. Hopefully we can work towards getting everyone represented relatively soon. I know I would be remiss if I don't thank our team, who has a lot to do in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully we can support them as much as possible to do this, but not to rush it so that we get anything wrong. So, as Ben said, not beforehand, but as we move through this. So thank you all for being a part of this, and appreciate you for doing it. So
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. I don't see the hand, but I saw a floating Judge Schote hand. Was that a floating Judge hand?
That was me clapping. I was clapping for the
Oh.
EAC team. So
They
thanks.
are awesome. They're machines. I can't believe it. It's great. Yeah, there's Isaac too. Okay, great. So that's going to conclude. They're all coming. That concludes our agenda for today. I want to thank you for discussing the draft VVSG 2.1. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
There's a second.
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 Any objection?
The one
All right.
thing is you still have to talk to the NIST director to get on his schedule for this meeting. So
Well, that's why
okay.
that's why I always need some wiggle room. If it needs to be approved for, I need to make sure the NIST team can be there, and hopefully the NIST director can be there. So understand.
All right.
Is it moved to seconded that this body adjourn the meeting? I'll now take a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say
Aye.
nay.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you once again. I appreciate all your efforts.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.